And before this video begins, I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. Thank you for supporting the channel. In 2005, after a long hiatus, Doctor Who returned to our screens with a fresh face, new companions, and a whole new universe full of mysteries and danger. Series 1 introduced an entire generation to the Ninth Doctor and Doctor Who as a whole, re-establishing the show as a cultural phenomenon and an iconic part of the British media landscape. There are all sorts of aliens, settings, and side characters in this series. It has a fascinating level of depth across expanded media and reference guides, so I thought it would be fitting to really dig in and explore the lore of Doctor Who Series 1. Who really was Clive Finch? What happened to Adam Mitchell and Blon Fel Fotch? How did Captain Jack lose his memories? Luckily for you, I'll be answering all these questions and more. This is a compilation of a series of videos I made about Series 1 and its different bits of interesting lore, all combined for your viewing pleasure. So buckle up, because it's time for 3 hours of Doctor Who Series 1 lore. Enjoy.
Absolutely fantastic.
I thought I'd kick this stuff off with a video all about the Autons and the Nestene Consciousness, the villains of the episode, because there's a lot of lore there in the 50 years since they first appeared in Spearhead from Space. Of course, there are going to be a lot of spoilers specifically for the stories on screen now, so consider that your spoiler warning. And now, without any further ado, let's take a deep dive into the history of the Nestene Consciousness. So, to start, what actually is the Nestene Consciousness? Well, according to the book Synthespians, at the beginning of our universe, a being named No, I'm not saying that second part. Crossed over from the previous universe when it ended. In our universe, she realised that she and her kind were basically gods. When she arrived, Shub was pregnant and gave birth on the planet Polymus in the Mutter Spiral Galaxy, also known as the Milky Way Galaxy. The planet was far from a red star, and all life on it was destroyed when Shub's child completely infused the planet, giving rise to what we now know as the Nestene Consciousness. The Nestene Consciousness is a disembodied life force, both a hive mind race and an energy-based singular entity with a specific ability to possess plastic itself, animating it and making it almost organic because the Nestene's molecular structure is very close to that of plastic. There's no single physical appearance of the Nestene because it can exist in all sorts of forms and places. It exists within everything it controls, especially the energy units used to move the consciousness, along with the Autons it uses as physical minions. But that being said, the consciousness can manifest itself as a single squid-like creature serving as a central brain of the Autons, but it could also manifest itself as the same kind of plastic an Auton is made out of. Indeed, even though the Nestenes were usually made of pure energy, they could still take physical form through possession of things like Autons, dolls, bins, rubber ducks, and even inflatable killer chairs. The comfort is to die for. In the early days of the Nestene Consciousness back on Polymus, their appearances were those squid-like creatures, although after they became beings of pure energy, they actually challenged the Time Lords themselves, as mentioned in Pandoric's box. This war broke out in the constellation of Slitheen in the Ilia Galaxy, which was close to Gallifrey itself, but Rassilon's forces were too powerful and contained the Nestenes within the galaxy, although this actually just doomed the worlds of Ilia to become Auton factory worlds and protein planets for the Nestenes to grow more powerful. However, Rassilon later used the super weapon The Moment to completely wipe out the galaxy and all life inside it, including the Nestenes and their slaves, although some managed to survive. Despite this, the Nestene Consciousness was a far cry from the incredibly powerful juggernaut it once was. This reduction in power didn't stop the consciousness invading countless planets though, now free of the galaxy. Under the leadership of the Nestene High Command, which is itself pretty vaguely defined, only appearing in the Terror of the Autons novelization, the consciousness invaded planets for 1,000 million years, including Kramodar and Plovac 6. These invasions were for a few different reasons, ranging from colonization to complete destruction, and also to use the planets as food sources for plastic and protein. A Nestene invasion is pretty simple and strategic. First of all, portions of the consciousness would be sent through space within hollow spheres called energy units, which appear like meteorites when they land on the target planet. These energy units can control plastics on their own, but the goal is to combine them all for full effectiveness, like Exodia the Forbidden One. The next step is to take control of a local being, with the Swarm Leader unit creating either a facsimile of this being or a completely original being, and then creating other Autons to collect together the other spheres. Gotta catch them all. Once these units are brought together, the consciousness can be grown within an environment tank and then take on a form perfectly adapted for conquest of the planet it has landed on. But let's backtrack a bit. What is an Auton? The Autons are robots usually resembling plastic shop window mannequins, animated by the nesting consciousness as soldiers and servants to do the bulk of its work for it. Although to control larger numbers, a transmitter is needed like we see with the London Iron Rose. The Autons aren't the only creations of the Nestines, but they're the most significant and common within the show. Not every Auton is a robot, instead just being made entirely of plastic and brought to life by the Nestine to control. Indeed, the mother consciousness exists within every creation, all the Autons actually containing a fragment of the consciousness itself. Larger fragments could be used to entirely copy the memories and brain patterns of a human, allowing for the Auton duplicate to completely pass itself off as the original person, kind of like a Zygon I guess. In fact, as we see in Spearhead from Space, Swarm Leader Channing contained enough of the consciousness to essentially give him feelings and some level of sentience and individuality, despite 1 being an Auton, and 2 not even being an Auton duplicate of someone that actually exists. Autons aren't really designed to look lifelike most of the time, with robotic movements and the ability to change the shape of their limbs and body at will, so they are incredibly versatile. They're also incredible trackers, with powerful hearing and the ability to hone in on other beings simply through brainwaves. The Autons are relentless in pursuit since they never tire and have no feelings, so things like terrain, distance, and weariness don't matter to them. In the same vein, Autons are difficult to fight because bullets have almost no effect on them, so any attempt to send in unit or the traditional military is a pretty bad idea. The Autons also have hidden wrist guns which are incredibly powerful, firing concentrated energy bolts that tear matter apart at a subatomic level, including the ability to totally vaporize targets. The wrist guns in Rose were even more advanced and could implode upon impact, leaving barely a trace of the human target. However, this doesn't mean the Autons are invincible, because they can be destroyed with the use of specific radio signals, along with intense heat melting them entirely because of all the plastic. You know, I mean, you can make them alien, but they're still plastic, they're still gonna melt. More importantly, if you break the link to the nesting consciousness by destroying the nestine itself, all the Autons under its control are deactivated because that link is cut off. Although that being said, if the connection is disrupted, it's still possible for Autons to go rogue and act independently with sentience rather than shutting down entirely. According to the BBV Auton films, which you know I'm not personally a fan of BBV content, but they're all fully licensed so I have to cover them. When the Nestines first reached Earth in the distant past, humanity hadn't evolved yet. We were still going, you know, like Ooga Booga, caveman, hit rock and stuff. So the Nestines buried 1 billion Nestine creatures all along the planet's ley lines, which were areas containing incredibly high levels of psi energy. Psi energy is basically the last surviving remnants of the early universe magics the Time Lords had cast out. Some of these Nestine deposits were destroyed throughout history as humanity did its thing, you know, going from hit rock against wall to hit club against face. Although these areas often became holy sites to humans as our species developed, beyond, you know, hitting club to face to hitting metal hammer to face. As the City of Death novelization claims, during the time of the ancient Greeks, the Nestines returned to see if the planet was ripe yet, only to realise that they still didn't have anything to take control of, so they popped off back home to Polymus for a cup of tea and decided to wait another few thousand years before checking in again. This takes us to the late 20th century, where everything would change forever as humans finally started to develop plastic and a lot of it, meaning Earth was finally a fertile ground for invasion by the Nestines. The first full-scale invasion was coordinated by a swarm leader known as Channing, who is a great example of the Nestines creating a more realistic and sophisticated human body from scratch to infiltrate a planet and sow the seeds for invasion. Channing took ownership of the company Autoplastics, mass-producing Autons to be placed in shops all across Britain before they were activated. However, this was actually a two-pronged invasion, because the other part of the plan was a contract with Madame Tussauds creating Auton waxworks of key military leaders and government figures, including British Army General Scobie, whose plastic duplicate was created to take his place and command the British Army to soften resistance against the shop Autons when they attacked key strategic positions. You can see the imperfections in the plastic Scobie, with an unnatural plasticky yellow tinge to his skin, but he was close enough to work for this side of the plan as long as the real Scobie was kept alive to maintain the copy. Again, kinda like Zygons. Channing hoped to grow the nesting consciousness at Autoplastics so it could take over the world fully, although the newly regenerated Third Doctor and Liz Shaw were able to destroy the manifestation and shut down all the duplicates, which all reverted to the appearances of basic Autons upon destruction. A few months after this incident, the Nestine attempted a second invasion as detailed in Terror of the Autons. This time the Nestine was working alongside the villainous Time Lord, the Master, to carry out their plan, which involved creating Autons to distribute plastic daffodils to the general public, which would be activated by radio waves and suffocate all the humans. The serial also shows us that the Autons could simply wear a plastic mask to appear appear human, rather than, being a full-blown copy. Although this method was less convincing and more of a short-term solution. It also reveals more of the Nestene abilities, like heat-activated dolls it could use for covert assassinations without any traces, and like I mentioned earlier, killer armchairs. Seriously, I just love this so much. The Master planned to manifest the Nestene at a radio tower, but the Third Doctor convinced his old frenemy to break the alliance because the Nestene would treat the Master the same as any of the humans in the invasion, which therefore naturally appealed to the Master's sense of self-preservation. Together, the Time Lords changed the polarity of the radio waves and managed to stop the manifestation, sending the Nestene back into space and deactivating the Autons, although the Master escaped from UNIT like a Saturday morning cartoon villain. The Nestene would attempt a couple more invasions as seen in Business Unusual and Business As Usual, with the Nestene consciousness secretly controlling a computer company called Senanet in 1989, planning on selling a very cheap games console with the goal of using the polymer cables to create a network and transfer its consciousness into every home on the planet. However, it was defeated by the 6th Doctor, Mel and the Brigadier, although they weren't aware that the Nestenes had also set up their plastic action figure company, Galaxy Plastics Incorporated. Although as far as I know, this plot point is still unresolved. I guess they just forgot about it. And now we get to those pesky BBV Auton films I mentioned earlier. In 1996, UNIT scientist Dr. Sally Arnold rediscovered a Nestene pod in storage, but when she tried to activate it for experiments, she exposed it to deep space transmissions and it re-established contact with the Nestene consciousness. In the chaos that followed, a second pod was activated and escaped to Sentinel Island, where it tried to revive those ancient Nestene creatures buried in the distant past. UNIT seemingly managed to stop it at the time, but it had actually implanted itself into Lockwood, a cybernetically enhanced UNIT operative, using him to invade the world and affect all the computers. The Nestenes once again tried to activate the ancient creatures, although Lockwood sacrificed himself to break the connection and destroy the Nestenes, ending the threat in 1998, 2 years after it began. However, according to Plastic Millennium, this wasn't the only 90s-based Nestene invasion. Indeed, at some point in the decade, a very sophisticated and human-looking Auton named Alicia Hammerson set up Hammerson Plastic plc, dominating the plastic market and becoming a significant name in the industry. She threw an extravagant party on New Year's Eve 1999, planning to replace all her guests with Auton replicas so the entire planet could be absorbed by the Nestene consciousness. However, when the 7th Doctor and Mel showed up, they broke the Nestene link and deactivated Alicia before she could carry out her plan. As shown, or heard, in Brave New Town, at some point during the Cold War, the Soviet Union discovered a Nestene energy unit and created Autons to act as spies within the UK, training them in the British-looking seaside town of Thorrington, Suffolk, which was actually in Uzbekistan, a little bit far away from Suffolk. However, when the country gained independence in 1991, the Autons stopped receiving orders from the Soviet Union, so ended up living the exact same day over and over again for 17 years, thinking they were human. This was until October 2008, when the 8th Doctor and companion Lucy Miller arrived in the training centre. It was then that the Nestene consciousness made contact with the Auton villagers and took them over, trying to use them to destroy humanity in typical Nestene fashion. Although the 8th Doctor was able to break the connection and free the Auton villagers so they could live their lives in peace. These villagers were proof of how accurately Autons could become almost entirely human with false memories and actually believing in their own cover story, like we see much later with Rory Williams in the Series 5 finale, and also the book Autonomy. According to this book, back in the 1980s, a young girl by the name of Elizabeth Devonshire discovered a surviving part of the Nestene consciousness in a warehouse and it befriended her, manipulating her into becoming a cold and calculating businesswoman. She set up the shopping and entertainment complex Hyperville with plans to take over the world in 2013. Part of this scheme involved the pop star Auton Shaniki and her superstar football husband Paul Kendrick, who both fully believed that they were human before they were activated. However, Shaniki would eventually overcome her programming and die in the process of helping the 10th Doctor and Kate Maguire defeat Miss Devonshire, who had become the physical form of the Nestene consciousness. Later that same year, according to unit extinction, 300 Nestene energy units fell to Earth, with the consciousness working with Devlin FutureTech CEO Simon Devlin to conquer Earth with his company's 3D printers. These began printing Autons across the world, and Devlin kidnapped unit boss Kate Stewart to try and turn her into an Auton, although she was saved by Josh Carter, who who ended up becoming an Auton in the process. As the physical Nestene began manifesting, the human forces found themselves defenseless against the Autons because all their weapons were made by Devlin's 3D printers, so were essentially sabotaged. The Nestene planned on encasing Earth within a plastic bubble using humans to create the liquid polymer. However, Osgood was able to free Josh from the Nestene control, and together they saved Kate to stop the Nestene, shutting down the Autons with the exception of Josh, who began using his plastic skeleton as a tool to help UNIT. Much further down the line in the 51st century, when Dory and Maldovar left to help the Doctor at Demon's Run, a group of aliens banded together to rob his Maldovarium, with the Nestene consciousness making a deal with the Krillitane Empire to create a lifelike Autondorium for the infiltration in exchange for a non-aggression pact between the two races. Also, at some point around this time, the Nestenes planted a set of energy units at the planet-sized Omnia Forum, hoping to use shopping as the staging ground for invasion yet again. However, when the business failed, the ion cloud around the giant store trapped the energy units and the Nestene tried stealing River Song's vortex manipulator, although this actually ended up destroying the units in the ion cloud rather than saving them. Even though it wasn't a Nestene scheme, during the events of the Prisoners of Time comic series, the Tremas Master and Adam Mitchell used Autons to trap the Sixth Doctor in 7214 Antarctica Police. Even though the Doctor melted them, what appeared to be Perry was kidnapped by Adam along with every other companion up to that point, with the villains later unleashing an Auton army to destroy the assembled Doctors. However, the Autons were eventually stopped and all the companions freed. Much further in the future though, in the 101st century to be specific, the Nestene consciousness tried to leave Polymus entirely after a Time Lord invasion. Its ultimate destination would be the New Earth Republic, which was a colonised area near the Ant Nebula that had become obsessed with the culture of 20th century Earth due to the television signals only now arriving at the New Earth Republic's Reef Station 1, which refined them and rebroadcast them for this future audience. However, things all went wrong due to one thing: sex robots. Yes, the most powerful businessman in the New Earth Republic, Walter Jeremiah Matheson III, was obsessed with the actor Dominique Delacroix from the series Executive Desires, so he helped the Autons make a perfect replica of her who was in love with him. You naughty boy.
Ooh, you're a real dreamboat.
Billy every teen.
He planned to house the Nestene consciousness within this duplicate, allowing it to escape Polymus and give Matheson a queen to rule the galaxy with. Chaos ensued on Reef Station 1 because of all the Autons and other plastic shenanigans, although the 6th Doctor worked with the Auton replica of Delacroix's co-star Marcus Brooks to trap the consciousness, and Matheson was so ashamed that he shot himself when the real Delacroix confronted him for making a sex robot of her, because, you know, don't do that, man, it's just creepy.
I want you to know that I love you as much as a man can love a computerized image of a gorgeous celebrity. Which it turns out is a lot.
When the last Great Time War broke out, Rassilon approached his old Nestene enemies to create an Auton duplicate of the War Doctor, planning on luring the Daleks into a trap at the expense of an army of Time Lord soldiers. However, the real War Doctor soon found out and obviously wasn't very happy, so he agreed to deal with the Nestenes to take control of his duplicate to save the Time Lord soldiers, whilst also sending another duplicate to go tell Rassilon off, while the real War Doctor stole weapons from the Time Lord armory. The catch with this though was that the War Doctor agreed to one day fight for the Nestene in the future. Due to their involvement in the Time War, the Dalek Handbook classifies the Nestenes as one of the higher species, because they were one of the few entities that could perceive the war and become involved. However, according to Revenge of the Nestene, the bonus chapter of the Rose novelization released by Russell T Davies, the Time War had a very serious effect on the Nestenes, leaving them crippled and weak. They were forced to make peace with the Plastic Conjunction, which was a collection of 17 protein planets farming smoke and oil for the Nestene consciousness. Kind of awkward to, go back to your slave planets and be like, hey guys, no hard feelings, right? The consciousness also developed a romance of sorts with the embodiment of Gris, the mysterious former master of the 5th galaxy. However, when the planet Nestania was exposed to the edge of the Time War, the embodiment was driven insane in a mere second by a blizzard of TikTok. Hey, I'm with you there, TikTok really does suck. The Nestene was de-aged by a wave of early, and all the food planets were destroyed by a cloud of late. Due to the Daleks' time destructor, Polymus was also seemingly destroyed during the war, and the Nestene consciousness was left just a little bit annoyed and vengeful. The Time War had further physical effects on the Nestene consciousness, altering its entire body to become made of plastic, manifesting it as more of a liquid form of a humanoid face, like we see in the episode Rose. Indeed, by using warp shunt technology, the Nestene consciousness travelled back in time to Earth 2005, planning on turning our home into its new food planet and weaponising shop mannequins across London. The novelisation elaborates on this plan, explaining that the Nestene consciousness also wanted to absorb the 9th Doctor to steal the TARDIS and invade further planets, which is why Mickey key was copied to gather more information on the Doctor. However, due to the nesting now being partially plastic, when Rose knocked a vial of antiplastic into the consciousness, it was destroyed. But according to Revenge of the Nesting, a small piece of the consciousness did survive, merging with the corpse of a certain unnamed blonde politician who had died during the Auton attack. It decided to lay low and play the long game, planning on taking revenge on the Doctor, something it managed to eventually achieve when it formed the Pandorica Alliance and imprisoned the 11th Doctor beneath Stonehenge, using companion Amy Pond's memory print to create perfect duplicates of Roman soldiers. This arguably makes the Nestings the most important players in that scheme, because these sleep agents were the perfect trick to lure the Doctor in. However, when the universe ended, the Autons and Nesting consciousness died, only being restored when the Doctor reset the universe, including restoring the Auton Rory Williams to humanity, albeit with his memories intact. And lastly, 300 years into the 11th Doctor protecting the town of Christmas on Trenzalore, a 5 Auton hit squad parachuted onto the planet without weapons to sneak past the papal mainframe. When they were blown off course by the crosswinds, the Nestine improvised a plan to trap the Doctor in Devil's Elbow Canyon in the Outland, which was a dangerously cold area 400 miles south of Christmas. The Doctor and a few humans journeyed there on a boat named the Lifeboat, only to be attacked by the Autons sent to kill him. However, the Doctor stopped them by blowing up the boat with the Autons on board, sinking it into the frozen Lake Lagda, although he speculated that the Nesting consciousness was still in orbit after hijacking another spaceship up there. So that's a pretty detailed and kind of exhaustive history of the Nesting consciousness and the Autons, and I swear I didn't mean for the video to be this long. I guess I just got a bit carried away, and even then I'd had to cut a few things out. I don't have every single Auton story covered. For a villain that is often summed up as just shop window dummies, there's actually a lot going on and a lot to learn about them, despite the Autons only properly appearing like 3 times within the show, with the rest being expanded media. And that's part of why I wanted to start this new series. Even things that are established well in the show have so much more depth and interesting lore hidden away in comics, books and audios, which I feel are often just as valid as the stuff on screen, because Doctor Who has no set canon, and that's something I absolutely love about it. I mean, I don't think the show would have had the audacity to claim the Nestines are descended from an actual Lovecraftian god. Despite the Nestines and Autons not really being close to my favourite villains, I still feel like they're long overdue a proper return, since Rose was quite a basic and broad use of them and didn't really show you much of what the Nesting consciousness was actually capable of. We're sticking with the episode Rose, and I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into a character who has become a bit of a fan favourite after his appearance in this episode. I am of course talking about Clive Finch, the bumbling but lovable conspiracy theorist who Rose meets during her search for the mysterious 9th Doctor. Obviously, Clive becomes a victim of the Autons during that episode, but he's a prime example of how expanded media can, well, expand on a backstory and history of a character. Most of the stuff I'm talking about today comes from the novelisation of Rose, the short story Persistence of Memory, and the Big Finish Rose Tyler spin-off, so beware of spoilers from those pieces of media. Right from the get-go, in typical Doctor Who fashion, we find ourselves with a bit of a continuity headache. You see, the Rose novelisation places Clive's birth year as 1961, but the Persistence of Memory claims he was born in 1965. I think for convenience we'll use the novelisation's birth year, because that has more wider implications on Doctor Who lore. In November 1963, when Clive was just 2 years old, the Shoreditch incident took place, as shown in Remembrance of the Daleks. This was a big battle between Imperial and Renegade Daleks, who were in the middle of a civil war. Both sides had travelled to Shoreditch to find the Hand of Omega, which would give them the upper hand. During this conflict, which also introduced my favourite Dalek, the Special Weapons Dalek, I mean just look at him, the Intrusion Countermeasures Group, which was a predecessor to UNIT, got involved to protect Earth from this Dalek firefight. Clive's father, 2nd Lieutenant Gary Jonathan Finch, wasn't part of countermeasures, but he was a soldier in the London Regiment of the Infantry and got caught up in the incident, being killed by an Imperial Dalek and becoming one of the many human casualties. Naturally, due to the alien nature of Gary's death, the truth was hushed up by the military for obvious reasons. They claimed Gary had died from the accidental discharge of a weapon while on manoeuvres, which obviously wasn't true. The Shoreditch incident itself was covered up with the explanation of the discovery of a cache of unexploded bombs, with the truth buried between a mountain of red tape. Growing up without a father, Clive, also going by the nickname CJ, became obsessed with all sorts of mysteries and conspiracy theories. There were the obvious ones like cryptids such as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yeti and the Loch Ness Monster, but Clive was also fascinated by things like the Bermuda Triangle, the Roswell crash, the mystery of the Mary Celeste, and the rumoured Panthers of Dartmoor, all very popular conspiracy theories and mysteries. According to The Persistence of Memory, on Christmas Eve 1975 or 1979, a 14-year-old Clive came across the 12th Doctor in a newsagent's and noticed the man was actually using coins from 1987. Recognising this anachronism, Clive followed the Doctor into the TARDIS and was actually allowed to take a trip in the TARDIS, the pair going to Loch Ness in search of the mythical monster. It actually turned out that Nessie did exist, although this was because of the Time Lord known as the Monk planning to wipe out humanity and sell the planet Earth to whichever alien race would pay the most. After the pair stopped the Monk's plan and used a memory worm on the antagonistic Time Lord, the 12th Doctor took Clive back home. However, he didn't use the memory worm on Clive, but since the young child had seen glimpses of his own future in the Auton invasion, the Doctor blurred his memories of the whole Loch Ness escapade. However, as he grew older, Clive continued to investigate mysteries, uncovering the truth of his father's death and becoming determined to research the Doctor specifically and solve the mystery of all his different identities throughout time. Clive's life eventually led him to Durham University and he joined a UFO society, obviously in search of more answers regarding the mysterious Doctor he was desperate to one day meet. At some point, his UFO society accidentally double booked a room with a Reclaim the Night enclave. Reclaim the Night was part of the late 20th century women's liberation movement, demanding that women be able to more safely move throughout public spaces at night. The movement started in Leeds as a response to the so-called Yorkshire Ripper murders, with the police having suggested women simply stay out of public spaces after dark, rather than, actually policing and making the public spaces safer for them. Clive and his friends were outnumbered 45-6, so they left and conceded the venue. However, when Clive wound up in Cuth's Spa, another student named Caroline, who was part of the Reclaim the Night enclave, tracked him down and wanted to apologise for the whole double booking fiasco. They talked throughout the night about Clive's fantastical theories and eventually fell in love, even if she was skeptical of his stories about alien invasions. The novelisation of Rose explains that Caroline loved his passion for his investigations and appreciated it, especially compared to the lies and cheats her friends had married. The book reads, Clive's greatest fault was to get a little bit too excited whenever there was a meteor storm. Clive and Caroline would marry, setting themselves up for a nice life with their two sons Ben and Michael, even if Caroline once had to ground Ben for breaking a window and wouldn't let him watch TV or play video games. Clive worked as an estate agent and the family lived at 1 Duke Street in Stoke Newington, London. However, despite this more domestic life, Clive's relentless search for the Doctor didn't end there. By 2005, he had set up and established the website www.whoisthedoctor.co.uk. He posted a lot of his research here and tracked the Doctor's appearances throughout history, calling for witnesses and stories from anyone who had encountered the Doctor in any form. This website was very popular and received hundreds of replies, including actual former companions and associates like Perry Brown, Mike Yates and Sarah Jane Smith. The website also contained photos such as the 9th Doctor running away from the Taj Mahal and the 4th Doctor in a number of locations like Rio, Berlin, the Great Wall of China, Paris, a beach and a tundra, really showing how dedicated Clive was to this search that he'd find so many images floating around despite organisations like UNIT trying their best to keep everything hidden under lock and key. After her own encounter with the 9th Doctor, Rose Tyler travelled to Clive's house to discuss the Doctor. As we see in the episode, he shows her images of the Doctor at Krakatoa, JFK's assassination and beside the Titanic. However, the novelisation goes into greater detail, with photos of the first 13 Doctors and 2 potential Doctors, although the War Doctor was obviously missing. By this point, Clive had become convinced that the Doctor was actually an immortal alien and all the photos were of the same person. He also suggested that the general public's memories of alien invasions were actually wiped by cracks in time. Little did he know how right he actually was, I guess. However, when Clive pleaded with Rose to take him to meet the 9th Doctor, she made excuses and left. You see, Clive was absolutely desperate to meet this mysterious stranger who had dominated his life for so long. In the book, he says this to Rose: "If you meet him for a 3rd time, can I come with you? It's all I've ever wanted my whole life, just to see the Doctor, to hear their voice, to look in their eyes." It's honestly quite hard to read that part and not feel so sad for Clive, because of how much he'd gone through and how long he'd dedicated himself to this search. Later that same day, Clive decided to treat his family by taking them shopping at Queen's Arcade after a Chinese buffet. However, it was then that the Auton army was activated and began attacking the population. Clive found himself in the middle of a very real alien invasion, proving his stories and theories to be fact. In fact, according to the book, he realised with horror that he'd read about this exact thing before due to the secret files of the first Auton invasion as shown in Spearhead from Space. The novelisation goes on to tell us that Clive decided to sacrifice himself to save his family, with a bittersweet realisation that this was the adventure he'd been craving for so long. In the aftermath of Clive's death, Caroline was absolutely livid and furious. Even though the Autons had deactivated at the last minute, saving her life and her son's lives, she blamed the Doctor for what she considered to be his role in Clive's death, due to the idea that death and disaster always follow the Doctor. To again quote the book, Caroline Finch made a promise. Somehow, someday, she would complete her husband's lifelong quest and find this mysterious Doctor, and then she would have her revenge. Some of Clive's possessions were seized by UNIT and kept in the Black Archive, but his website remained online, being taken over by Mickey Smith, who continued Clive's work of archiving pictures and mentions of the Doctor throughout human history. But this isn't where Clive's story ends. Well, it is, but he's not the only Clive Finch in the Doctor Who multiverse. As the saying goes, there is another. Indeed, during Rose Tyler's travels through the different dimensions to find the 10th Doctor, she came across a parallel universe Clive who was still alive because the 2005 Nesting invasion had never taken place to begin with. Incidentally, this universe was also one where Pete Tyler and Jackie Prentice had broken up after just a year of dating, meaning Rose was never born in that reality. Similarly, the parallel Clive had never married or had kids, not investigating the Doctor because, well, there wasn't one in this reality. Although that being said, parallel Clive still maintained the original Clive's passion for UFOs and the paranormal. However, this parallel Earth was doomed, with its sun slowly being extinguished and on course to plunge the planet into eternal darkness and coldness, wiping out all life. Rose was forced to leave the alternate Pete and Jackie behind, but she rescued Clive and brought him back to Pete's world, where the Dimension Cannon project was based. So, for ease of identification, we'll now call him Pete's World Clive, even if that wasn't where he originally came from, because, you know, he's not the only parallel Clive kicking about, so we need to differentiate them somehow. Rose and Pete's World Clive then travelled to another parallel universe where he met the living counterpart of his father Gary Finch, only to learn that he had no children, meaning Clive had no parallel self in this particular rain-soaked world. However, after a mix-up at a UFO meeting, he did manage to meet the counterpart of Caroline, who, you know, he hadn't married in his home universe. This Caroline was a protester fed up with the government lying about global warming and their oppression of modern science and technology. Pete's World Clive and parallel Caroline started talking and grew closer when they were searching a library for any traces or mentions of the 10th Doctor, who again didn't seem to exist in this universe. They started to fall in love and both wanted Caroline to come back to Pete's world to live with Clive, but it was forbidden because of the risk it posed to the dimensions. After an emotional farewell, Clive returned to Pete's world, where he would become controller of the Dimension Cannon, taking over from Pete Tyler when the latter joined Rose on her travels through the dimensions, and whenever Pete happened to, you know, be away or unavailable for whatever reason. When Rose travelled to an Earth under threat from a mining probe stealing salt from the oceans, she encountered who we'll call Saltwater Clive, who was leading a rebellion group against the government who were acting very suspicious and covering up all sorts of stuff including UFOs. This Clive believed the government had faster than light communication, which Rose hoped to use to send a message to the Doctor back in her original universe. Both Clives worked together over the phone to plan this mission for Rose, although she was then arrested and it was up to Saltwater Clive and friend Reverend Georgina Stacy to save their planet from nuclear Armageddon and get the mining drone to leave Earth alone. After successfully navigating this incident, Saltwater Clive was recruited into the government, who, you know, were actually pretty nice people who didn't mean to act like villains at all, it was just a misunderstanding. Rose left the Saltwater universe in good spirits, having high hopes, although when she returned to base, Pete's World Clive told her that the Saltwater universe only had about 5 years left before it collapsed. So despite the optimism, Saltwater Clive was still doomed either way. And lastly, for our journey into the Clive-verse, we have Professor Clive Finch in the Rogue Planet parallel universe, who studied mysterious comets and predicted the end of the world at the hands of a rogue planet. He didn't have a family, but he was an astronomer and theoretical physicist, specifically head of the Department of Astronomy at University College London. His accurate belief was that a rogue planet entering the solar system was sending the meteors to Earth before itself disrupting the orbit, causing an apocalypse and wiping out everyone on the planet unless they fled into underground bunkers he had started building. After surviving a comet strike in the TV studio where he and Rogue Planet Jackie were presenting daytime TV, Professor Finch met Rose and Rosie, the counterpart of Rose. However, there was only space in the bunkers for a few tens of thousands of people, since they had expected a few more years to prepare for this incident. Professor Finch began the evacuation, prioritising essential workers and children like Rose's son Jimmy. The audio Rogue Planet doesn't really specify whether Clive managed to survive the planetary disruption, since it happened too quickly for them all to prepare. But he was at a bunker when the apocalypse began, so I think it's safe to assume that he did survive and ultimately helped the population adjust to life underground. So, that's the surprisingly deep tale of Clive Finch and all his parallel universe counterparts. Yeah, I bet you didn't expect me to get like a 12-minute video out of one side character, but that's the depth of Doctor Who. There's always media expanding on the backstories or further adventures of characters, even if they were just random one-off ones in the TV show. The Rose novelisation really fleshes Clive out in a great way and makes his death a lot more tragic, really honing in on his obsession with the Doctor and how the Time Lord unknowingly cost him the life of his father and himself, even if it really wasn't the Time Lord's fault either time. Clive only had a short appearance in the episode Rose, but I really appreciate how extended media has expanded his characteristics and given more of a backstory without making him too important or unrealistic. He's still just a regular everyday guy whose life was touched by the Doctor in different ways and left a lasting impact. Clive was the perfect kind of character for Rose to meet in that episode because it taught both her and the new audience a lot about the Doctor, so it's nice to see him become less of a plot device and more of a defined person with his own story. It kind of reminds me of the Star Wars book from a certain point of view, which I'm reading at the moment. That book has all kinds of short stories from all sorts of characters who barely impacted the narrative of A New Hope, but adds more layers to them and reminds you that yes, they exist before and after their appearances. They're fully fledged people who don't disappear the moment they're off screen. So that's my deep dive into the lore of the unassuming Clive Finch. Thank you if you managed to somehow make it all the way through. This time I'm going to be taking a look at the episode The End of the World. This episode was designed to be an impressive showcase of the modern era CGI and effects work, so the production team filled it with lots of interesting and colourful aliens. So naturally I wanted to go through all of these aliens and creatures because a lot of them have actually been given proper backstories and some of their stories are very wild. So without further ado, this is the story of every alien from The End of the World. And naturally beware spoilers for the stories on screen now. You have been warned.
If you're on board, we'd better start. Enjoy.
So first of all, let's start off with the very first alien we see in the episode, the Steward, who was the manager of the station and had also hosted events on platforms 3, 6 and 15 as well, although we don't know anything about those other platforms. According to the reference book Monsters and Villains, which I'll be referring to a lot in this video, Platform 1 is a sprawling 3-mile wide space station, so it's safe to say that the Steward had a lot to keep track of. There's no real information or backstory regarding the Steward himself, but the comic The Whole Thing's Bananas gives these blue people a species named Crispallion. Crispallions were from the planet Crispallion, which isn't actually a planet, it's instead part of the Jagged Brocade, which is a conglomerate of planets, although we don't know anything about the location or its culture. The staff of Platform 1 were also Crispallions, like Raffalo the plumber killed by the metal spiders. But more interestingly, The Whole Thing's Bananas specifically names Dorian Maldavar as a Crispallion, despite him not having those same facial markings as the ones on Platform 1. Dorian Maldavar will get his own video when I get to series 5 or 6, but he was basically a black market dealer who reluctantly helped the War Doctor destroy the Villain Guard weapons factories by turning them into palm trees instead. But like I said, Dorian will get his own video eventually. There are other blue aliens in the show, specifically in series 10, but as far as I know, these aren't actually named as being Crispallions in any media, so it's still up in the air about whether they are or not. Next up, we have the Forest of Cheam, who actually have a lot of interesting lore around them. Naturally, as we see in the episode, they're big, walking, talking trees, but in Monsters and Villains, Russell T Davies gives them a really detailed biography about their origins. According to this, their origins go all the way back to what's called the Middle Blue period of planet Earth, but in the 5th calendar year of 111222/9967, which rolls off the tongue, Earth had a lot of debts, so illegally auctioned off an area of land across the equator around 500 miles long and 3 miles wide. According to this biography, Brazil and all 5 billion occupants were sold to the brutal deathsmiths of Goth, who experimented on the Brazilians in bizarre and terrible ways. However, the equatorial patch was a lot luckier, being brought by the Brothers of Haim. This wise and wonderful brotherhood were descendants of the Autons, who were legendary genetic experts. The Brothers of Haim were dedicated to enhancing the universe with new forms of life, so they isolated the equatorial patch on the Pan-Jurassic asteroid field. It was cultivated, fostered, nurtured, and its evolution accelerated to compress 1 billion years of evolution into just 300. The biography reads, first, the rainforest achieved a level 3 sentience. Within 2 generations, the first tree forms were beginning to take shape, moulded in the bark with arms reaching from the treetops. It is written that the wind in the branches became a single harmonious voice. 20 years later, the tree forms developed the ability to walk, and then further developed language, communication, and compassion.
The gift of peace. I bring you a cutting of my grandfather.
200 years after the experiments had begun, the forest named itself as Cheam after its word for water. It existed as a separate theocracy on the groves of the asteroid field, growing and maturing to the extent it actively resented being controlled by the Brotherhood, who were always just kind of sitting there like... There were some minor skirmishes as the forest tried to assert its own evolutionary rights, demanding an end to these experiments by the Brotherhood, who said yes. Yeah, the Brotherhood had already learned from previous mistakes in genetic acceleration, so they just gave the forest complete independence. I guess they didn't want any drama. It's after this that the book describes the forest history as taking a shadowy turn, the stuff of mythology. Davis writes, "It is said that, as one, every treeform heard the Great Calling. Every member of the race got into their bank ships and left the asteroid field in a single night, travelling to the far edges of the universe and disappearing from history." Again, to quote the book, what they saw there, what they learned, is never spoke of. Some say the forest met God, some say the forest killed God, some say the forest is God, but no treeform will ever discuss the Great Calling, its origin, or its consequences. So yeah, they probably saw some absolute cosmic horror insanity while they were out in the depths of space for 5,000 years. Indeed, when they came back, they had what the book describes as a wisdom and grace unparalleled in fit 5 civilizations, and were treated with reverence wherever they went. Somehow during this absence, the Forest of Cheam had become a higher species, and were even able to observe the Time War, weeping as they looked on at the mighty war because they were horrified by all the bloodshed. By the time we see the Forest of Cheam in the End of the World, their roots had spread throughout the universe, with the treeforms living on a planet named Cheam and New Earth, where they were initially hunted by the Termitons, a termite-like race indigenous to the New Forest. Or would that be the New Forest? Anyway, these 8-foot tall Termitons were eventually stopped by the New Earth Senate, and the treeforms were able to live a much quieter life, with specific members like Xylem Mapledorm, who was a spiritual leader, and Sapling Vale, who was a cutting of Jabe Keth Jaff, who had been on Platform 1. Monsters and Villains describe the Platform 1 Forest of Cheam as being selected from the forest's younger branches, out of the Caven Hole Arboretum. Jabe was joined by Coffer and Loot, with the trio attending the End of the World party due to the wealth of the Forest of Cheam, wanting to keep their share prices up because they were absolutely stinking rich due to all the land they owned, although they did actually genuinely want to pay their respects to their roots. And yes, pun absolutely intended. And now we get to one of my favourite little creatures from the episode, the Mox of Balhoun, who represented the solicitors Jolko and Jolko. The Mox was a Balhounian from the planet Balhoun, which was part of the Galactic Federation, a huge political entity which succeeded the Earth Empire as the galaxy's dominant faction, including planets like Peladon, Earth, Mars, Draconia, Thoros Beta, and Zygor, along with many others. According to Monsters of Villains, the Mox of Balhoun was part of the Rak Fen Jakaviti Rab Mol Fel Mol Tacit conglomerate. Yeah, it just rolls right off the tongue. This was part of the Hanamakat Pel Jadrabone, part associated with the Rakasine Hoblamete, but independent of the Rock Math Pateen 6. I hate you sometimes, Russell. The book also provides the genetic code registration 5.6.9.222.0 and advises that in an emergency, if his bodily fluids are not replaced by the chair's internal filter every 25 minutes, then the Mox has been known to sweat galactic acid. Apparently it's a bad idea to touch him if he does this. The entry also says that the Mox's favourite song is Yap Cap Forward Bigger Toom Toom Toom. Man, that's a banger, always loved it. Of course, the Mox ends up a little bit crispy during the events of the episode, but there are two more Balhounians we know of. I'll get to Elth towards the end, but Big Finish's Classic Doctor's New Monsters 3 introduced the Hox of Balhoun, the well-meaning brother of the Mox, who the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane meet in a reconstructed Earth house set up as a preservation effort, because of the actual Earth being destroyed. Despite him being obsessed with collecting Earth stuff and Earth culture, you know, he's a bit of an Earthaboo, the Hox basically has no idea of humanity or human history, kind of like Mr. Copper with all those misconceptions, which is quite fun.
Where did you get all this from? Well, I have a first-class degree in earthonomics.
So we've had some nice lore and expanded backstories, but now it's time to skim through the ones with less substance. Obviously we have the adherents of the repeated meme, who are apparently from Financial Family 7 and recite their meme at 30-minute intervals, although they didn't actually exist and were just part of Cassandra's plan. Next are the brothers Hop Pyleen, who were two very rich reptilian brothers who lived on the cliff tops of Rex Vox Jax when they were growing up and liked to wear fur coats to keep their cold-blooded reptile bodies warm. They became notable for developing the Hyposlip travel system, a starship engine that made them rich and famous. According to the Battles in Time comic Death Race 5 Billion, this engine was used in the racing pod H500, also known as the Hyposlip 500 Lightspeed Podule. On its debut race, this pod was stolen by its pilot Skip Pyleen, who was planning on selling the pod's secret technology to the Racanoids, a race of galactic techno-thieves, but was stopped by the 10th Doctor. Our next alien is Cal Sparkplug, who doesn't really get much of an introduction in the episode, but Monsters and Villains names him as Cal McNanovich, a cybernetic hyperstar who attends the event incognito with his partner Noxwen Van Koofen, both beings wearing giant hooded cloaks and cybernetic face masks, providing them with special air. Not much is known about these two, we don't even have like a species name or a home planet, but according to Art of Destruction, Cal Sparkplug played James Bond at one point in one of his hyperfilms, with the 10th Doctor singling him out as his favourite version of the iconic spy. I'm sure he did a great job, you know, he just fits right in there with Connery, Brosnan and more. You know, you have those and then you have Cal Sparkplug. Wouldn't even know that they're different species.
I have no objections.
Not much is known about the bird-like Mr. and Mrs. Paku, but we do know that this is the name of their species and there was a president named Kakar, along with Paku huntmasters who, well, carried out hunts. I know, shocking. Also, in the background of the episode are the ambassadors from the city-state of the Binding Light, the humanoid creatures with pointy ears and multiple eyes. Nothing is really known about this species apart from them having oxygen sensitivity, and another member of the species did appear in the background of the Rings of Akaton. Similarly, there isn't much information about the 4 scholars of the University of Rago 56 Rago, who are the wicker basket looking guys. According to TARDIS Wiki, they're tended because of their 27 A++ scores in Class 55 at the university, but I can't find any source for this, so I don't even know if it's true. But we do know that one of them died from the heat of the sun as it destroyed the Earth. Lastly, just for completion's sake, I'll mention the robotic spider creatures, although they haven't had any appearances outside of End of the World and New Earth, so there's nothing really to say about them. But the same cannot be said for our next 2 guests.
Please welcome the Face of Bo.
The sponsor of the Platform 1 party was the Face of Bo, who apparently organised the whole thing and invited everyone. The episode says Bo is from the Silver Devastation, which the Game of Death describes as being an area in deep space where 2 galaxies collided over 1 billion years ago. This caused a stellar collapse, which is what the Silver Devastation is, simply a vast sector of space filled with nothing but dead stars and dark matter, named for its visual resemblance to a huge silver sea hanging in space. It's an area shrouded in mystery and myth, fascinating space travellers throughout the history of the universe. It's the subject of endless speculation, with some people claiming it's home to mutant survivors of the 2 galaxies, or refugees from the old time caught in eternal conflict. Some believe that there are blood-sucking monsters from another universe, and others suggest it's simply an empty void. Not much is known about the Silver Devastation at all, but this is supposedly the place where the giant head Bo kind come from, although we've only ever seen the one Bo. Monsters and Villains contains a bio for the Face of Bo, furthering the legendary and mysterious origin of the creature. It claims that there's evidence of him being present when the stars of the Andromeda Galaxy were still nothing but dust. The entry speculates that Bo's longevity is by will alone or mistake, even claiming that the planets of Kep Calason refer to him as the creature that God forgot. Bo had 6 children during the 4th Great and Bountiful Human Empire, 3 sons and 3 daughters including Bo Mina. However, apparently all of these offspring had a natural lifespan of just 40 years, with Bo himself outliving them, leaving him as the last of his kind by the time he died in the year 5,023,000,000. The Face of Bo could communicate telepathically, and he was kept inside a life support tank pumping in gases to keep him alive. He was one of the oldest beings in the universe, because according to showrunner Russell T Davies, he was none other than Captain Jack Harkness himself, who had been rendered immortal by the Bad Wolf entity during the Dalek invasion of the game station. According to Jack, when he was growing up, the Face of Bo was a nickname he had due to his home being the Beauchene Peninsula, so his familiarity of the Doctor in New Earth and Gridlock makes a lot of sense, along with Bo's dying message. I've never been shy of my own personal rejection of this, but it was the intent of Russell T Davies, so yeah, I guess I have to go along with it. Just please don't get mad at me again.
The Lady, Cassandra O'Brien, Delta 17.
And lastly, we have the bitchy trampoline herself, Lady Cassandra O'Brien. Delta 17, who considered herself the last pure human, with a Texan father and a mother from the Arctic desert. When we meet Cassandra in the episode, she's 708 operations into her painfully extended life, and is horrendously vain to the extent of having any wrinkles cut out with a scalpel. But according to Monsters and Villains, her earlier life was a lot different. The book claims that Cassandra was born into the ruins of the Warsaw Apology in the old calendar year of 4.99/4763/A/15, but not much is known of her early years. The in-universe biography says Cassandra was actually born a male by the name of Brian Edward Copps, who became a security guard at Climb Enterprises in the year A/32. 2 years later, a Miss B.E. Copps had married Harry Climb, the billionaire owner of the company, who 6 months later mysteriously fell on his own garden rake 6 times and died. Such a tragic accident. The newly widowed Mrs. Copps Climb inherited the empire, but quickly cashed in on her stocks and fled when the police called in a rake expert. From here, she seemingly travelled to the Linladen Bordello on the lawless border world of Rit. The book claims in the OC year A/60, a thumbprint matching Mrs. Copps Climb was found on the body of a murdered punter, with the Bordello's Madam Kitty Gillespie mysteriously vanishing that night and leaving for Saintsworld. You know, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. 20 years later, on Saintsworld, there was finally the first record of a woman going by the name of Cassandra. Oh, and yeah, by the way, you know the lady? Yeah, that's not real. She bought it for 50 KLM at the Instant Royalty Bazaar. Caught you in 4K there, Cassandra. Anyway, there was an actor named Cassandra Hoots who appeared in B-movies such as Mind My Legs and Run Betty Run. She then married the studio boss Ivor Cannonbone, who died soon after because a piano fell on him. Yeah, you've really got to be careful with those falling pianos. It's happening all the time. Mrs. Cassandra Cannonbone then became head of the company, once again widowed under tragic circumstances. However, it was in that same year that the original Brian Copps suddenly appeared again, starring in the musical biopic Look at Me Laughing. This was critically panned, although soon after 15 of these critics mysteriously died, along with 2 surgeons, and Brian vanished from the record for good. In the OC year B/1, Cannonbone Pictures collapsed, but Cassandra fled the planet and was soon on the arm of the 1,000-year-old Prince Regent Lucius at the 15th Pylomic Games. But then tragedy would strike once more, with a terrible gliding accident taking the lives of the entire Lucius family, leaving poor widowed Princess Cassandra as the only living heir. She's so unlucky, poor woman. Anyway, there's then a gap of God knows how long, with Lady Cassandra going through all these surgeries in a desperate attempt to remain beautiful and famous, even turning to straight out villainy like we see in The End of the World and New Earth, before she finally died in the arms of her past self, having at last come to terms with her own mortality.
He just collapsed. I think he's dying. Someone do something!
And that's it for all the aliens and creatures on board Platform 1 during that fateful day when the Earth died in a big ball of flame. But it didn't actually end there. Earlier I mentioned the Elf of Balhoun, the Mox's brother. Indeed, the Elf believed that the Mox's death was due to the negligence of the other attendees, so he kidnapped them all one by one and planned to kill them and get his revenge. However, he was stopped by the 10th Doctor, and the attendees forgave the Elf and helped him through his grief. So now with that out of the way, we finally reached the end of this video, which again ended up way longer than I expected to be. From blue Crispellions to big heads in jars, Platform 1 played host to all sorts of aliens and creatures, so it's fun to see where some of them came from and where some of them ended up going, despite most of them dying. It's nice to see some of these aliens getting more elaborate histories, because it helps to make the Doctor Who universe feel a lot bigger and more lived in. Now, if you don't mind, I'm off to watch the next Cal Sparkplug banger, the remake of the 600th century classic Indianapolis Johnston and the Phase Shift of Calamity. What a great movie. Today I wanted to continue in a new series about modern Doctor Who lore and talk about the Cardiff Rift, which was introduced in the Series 1 episode The Unquiet Dead. This is a mysterious time rift in and above the city of Cardiff, monitored by Torchwood 3, and it allows the Doctor to refuel their TARDIS after the destruction of Gallifrey. There's actually a lot of interesting stuff to learn about the Rift thanks to Torchwood and expanded media, so I thought it would be a great idea to do a deep dive of sorts into the lore of this time rift and see just how many secrets it has hidden away. So beware spoilers of all the stories on screen now, and let's get on with it. So what is a time rift? Well, they're described as being a weakness in space and time big enough for people or objects to travel from one place and time to another, even potentially serving as a gateway into another universe entirely. Cardiff had one of these localised entirely within the bay, give or take 5 or so miles, and running through the centre of the city. Although like we see in End of Days, it could expand to cover places around the world like India and Japan. The The other end of the rift is not so easy to locate though, with the Torchwood website claiming that the other end is wandering in a seemingly random progression across the universe. It seemed to open all over the universe and could even suck people and objects through against their will. However, it was possible to manipulate the rift and open it on command, like the Weevils who used it to cross over into Cardiff, the Saviour who was an alien slave trader capable of opening the rift to send people to any planet in the universe and any time in the past, and the alien race the Sanctified also learned how to control the rift. These were dinosaur farmers who used to be a warlike race with an empire, and the rift apparently had many openings in their area of the galaxy specifically, but we'll get to them later. The Cardiff Rift wasn't actually that unique because there were loads of other rifts throughout both Earth and the wider universe, like the rift in Coal Hill Academy, which was opened by the Shadowkin and couldn't be properly closed because of all the Autons energy around the school due to things like the Doctor's multiple visits there. According to the book's set piece, there were also time rifts in ancient Egypt and 1871 Paris, along with the Aberdeen Rift we see in the Eaters of Light. However, the Cardiff Rift was different because of how much more permanent it was, with a lot more foot traffic than those other rifts I just mentioned. Nobody quite knows how long the Cardiff Rift has existed, but according to House of the Dead, Siriath was trapped underneath a rift during the Dark Times before time itself had begun, and before the Earth itself even existed. Siriath was apparently an entity from the oldest universe of all, and almost escaped in 2010. This would have allowed her to use the Dead as a weapon to rip the world apart and possess others, but she was stopped by the ghost of Yanto Jones, and again, more on that later. Also in the distant past, Abaddon, the son of the beast, fought alongside the halogen lifeforms named the Light, who could live in temporal rifts. These two allies fought against Pukum and the Dark. Is Pukum how you say it? I don't know, I guess it's Welsh, and I'm not Welsh, so I'm just going to say Pukum. These two groups were essentially the same, yet opposites of their enemies. You had the Light and then the Dark. It goes without saying, they were quite literally opposites. These two sides fought throughout space and time until they reached the Cardiff Rift and were all imprisoned inside, with Abaddon's existence known to ancient Mesopotamia, who carved a visual of him standing over a powerless city. Abaddon's return was heralded as far back as 1827, with the rift then opening in 1876 Tratari, allowing the demons to fight once more with the help of Bilis Manger and Cathard Manger. Abaddon was seemingly defeated, allowing Pukum and the Dark to take control of the rift for good. But let's backtrack a few years to 1869. During the last Great Time War, the humanoid Gelth were reduced to a gaseous form and lost their home planet, so they travelled through the rift into 1869 Cardiff, as we see in The Unquiet Dead. During this episode, we also meet Gwyneth, a servant girl who had developed psychic abilities by being so close to the rift. Yes, it was possible for individuals and entire species to develop a level of psychic abilities or time sensitivity by growing up or developing near a time rift like the one in Cardiff. It's also an effect that happened in Pompeii after the power of Vesuvius' eruption opened a brief time rift which echoed back in time and gave some of the population the ability of psychic foresight. The Gelth used Gwyneth's powers to try and open the rift further to allow themselves to invade the planet Earth and take over all the dead. However, they were stopped when Gwyneth closed the rift, although this would only be a temporary solution, as more Gelth would attempt to invade through a rift in Cheltenham Abbey, and the Cardiff Rift itself would increase in activity after December 1869, now that it had been even temporarily opened wider. 10 years after the Gelth incident, the Torchwood Institute was set up by Queen Victoria. Even though Torchwood was mainly based in London, the Queen assigned Agnes Havisham as Torchwood Assessor to watch over the future of the Institute. In 1885, Havisham suggested the creation of Torchwood 3 in Cardiff, based on the threat the rift posed after its activations. It was Torchwood 3's mandate to observe and control the rift along with dealing with the aftermath of any rift activity, although any attempts to voyage into the rift itself were complete failures. This gave Torchwood 3 a nearly 200-year mission of fighting aliens and recovering any artifacts coming through the rift, to the extent that they were even able to develop a rift manipulator to control the rift itself, although only to a limited extent for the majority of Torchwood's existence. However, by 2069, yes, make your silly jokes, Torchwood had managed to control the rift to the extent that they could send people back through it to another time period. The rift manipulator was being developed as far back as the 13th of April 1913, and when it was finished, it was hidden inside the Roldal Plus water tower above the Torchwood hub. It could be activated to either open the rift wider or to stabilize it, or to, drag a TARDIS back home. Although this all tended to have very mixed results, usually causing more issues like releasing all sorts of aliens and monsters, but we'll get to those in a minute. Or, just watch Torchwood. In September 2006, escaped Slitheen criminal Blon Fel Fotch tried creating a nuclear power plant in Cardiff with the hopes of causing a core meltdown on top of the rift, destroying Earth and allowing her to escape using a space surfboard thing. However, her backup plan was to trick the Doctor into connecting the extrapolator to the TARDIS, which would end up opening the rift and causing chaos in Cardiff. Despite the Doctor and Captain Jack shutting the rift back down, it's highly likely that the temporary opening created a host of new activity for Torchwood to have to deal with. Indeed, when Gwen Cooper joined Torchwood, Captain Jack noted how much more active the rift had recently been. Torchwood had been forced to capture a pterodactyl, and increasing numbers of cortex leeches were arriving in Cardiff, which were parasitic creatures killing hosts and taking control of their corpses, targeting mainly the homeless, and even killing Torchwood member Sebastian Vaughn. After Gwen joined, the rift became even more prominent and unstable, with more weevils coming through, and even a plane from 1953 appearing from the rift. The rift's effects on Torchwood culminated when Captain Jack and Toshiko Sato found themselves time shifted into 1941, with Owen Harper being forced to open a rift to bring his teammates back, although this was actually all part of a wider master plan. After his Lord Abaddon had seemingly been defeated, Billis Manger set about planning for the creature's return with the use of a diary. After trying to access the artifacts of the Torchwood archive, Billis used his abilities to walk through time to manipulate the members of Torchwood to open the rift and unleash Abaddon once more, because the demon had actually faked his defeat all those years ago. Indeed, when the rift was opened to protect the Earth, Abaddon attempted to wipe out Cardiff, although he was stopped by Jack Harkness, who allowed the demon to drain his infinite life energy. This left the Light alone in their battle against the Dark and Brookham, with Billis returning to force Torchwood to help the Light due to the threat posed by the now unchecked Brookham. Indeed, Billis showed the Torchwood members an alternate future where the Dark possesses the Torchwood members to capture Jack Harkness and use his immortality to take complete control of the rift and turn Torchwood into the most powerful empire on the planet. This vision of the future forced Torchwood and Billis to work together and imprison the Dark in a wooden box, before sending the Light back down to the rift to imprison Brookham for good. Although Billis would then once again become Torchwood's adversary many times further down the line. In the aftermath of the Abaddon incident, the rift would continue to become more active, something which either caused or was caused by something known as rift storms. A rift storm was a phenomenon seemingly exclusive to the Cardiff Rift that could lead to travel through the rift itself. We see this as Captain John Hart and Gray artificially create rift storms to travel to and from Cardiff and its many different time periods, showing that the rift can be manipulated in the same way as the time vortex itself. Another effect of the rift was its ability to infect beings with its tendrils of energy. Indeed, when insurance worker Paul Talbot was walking home from a night out, he was hit with one of these tendrils, which began to mutate his DNA and turned him into a ravenous cannibal, needing to eat people in order to survive. It turned out that there was no cure or solution to this, so when Paul was captured by Torchwood, he agreed to die peacefully rather than be shot by them. However, this wasn't the only way the rift could destroy the lives of innocent passers-by. As we see in Adrift, the rift was capable of abducting people and items rather than just ejecting them out into Cardiff. Multiple missing people throughout Cardiff's history were victims of this rift activity, although it seemed to be consciously returning them to Cardiff as if to make up for its mistake, even if they came back disfigured or permanently damaged from their journey through the rift, which, you know, is just a little bit terrifying that it can just swoop you up and spit you out like that. In 2008, the Sanctified began to believe that the Torchwood Rift Manipulator would be used to destroy their empire, so they created rift storms and sent their Harrow-kind shock troopers to attack Torchwood and the mysterious Vox, who was on the run from the Sanctified. This comic story, Rift War, also introduces the idea of a race named the Shem, who created the Omicron artificial intelligence to explore and map the rift, suggesting that it was a physical dimension that could actually be mapped out in a traditional fashion. Now, when it comes to the closing of the rift, things can get a bit confusing. According to Torchwood creator Russell T Davies, the rift was closed alongside the cracks in time when the 11th Doctor rebooted the universe in the Big Bang. However, the audio drama The House of the Dead tells a different story. This audio sees Captain Jack travel to the most haunted pub in Wales, which was built on top of a crack in the rift. When the psychic Mrs. Wintergreen held a seance, she accidentally summoned Siriath, who could bend time and sent the attendees visions of dead people. This included showing Jack a ghost of Yanto Jones, although this echo then used a giant battery of stored rift energy to destroy the house and Siriath, along with supposedly sealing the rift forever. This was one of the reasons Jack decided to shut down Torchwood 3 after the Children of Earth incident, which had also seen the destruction of the Torchwood hub and the rift manipulator inside it. But the story of the Rift doesn't end there. In the late 2010s, former Torchwood agent Gwen Cooper came out of retirement to restart Torchwood 3, using the salvage parts of the Rift manipulator to trace space-time holes which seemed to indicate the Rift reopening, something confirmed in 2017 when Gwen, Captain Jack and St. John Colchester had rebuilt the hub and the Rift manipulator itself due to Rift breaches. As chronicled in the Aliens Among Us and God Among Us series, the Rift became incredibly active once again, with the villainous Sorvix travelling through the Rift and invading Cardiff, along with Billis Manger forcefully opening the Rift wide enough to contact the Sorvix god they had been running from and help bring her to Earth. The triple threat of the Sorvix, God and the Committee was an absolute onslaught for Cardiff in the Ragtag Torture 3, with entities such as the Predator and the Night Sun being unleashed by God to restore the balance of the Rift after she resurrected Colchester. Similarly, when the Committee trapped Norton Folgate in a time loop at the edge of the Rift to send energy into the Earth's core, God helped Norton free himself, although this caused a tsunami to wreck Cardiff to once again balance things out. This allowed the Committee to install their own Rift manipulator in the hub so they could stabilise the Rift and travel through it from their home Erebus, although they were stopped by Torture 3 leader Yvonne Hartman, who channeled God's powers through the Rift and destroyed Erebus entirely, although the status of the Rift remains unknown as the Torture series continues. The Cardiff Rift is a chilling example of a threat that only Torchwood can deal with. How can our Empire protect a border like the Rift? How can we defend ourselves against an opening into hell, into other worlds and realms of nightmare? How can we ever be safe when unimaginable demons can step through at any moment? These were the words of Queen Victoria in August 1883, and I think it perfectly sums up the intrigue and mystery of the Cardiff Rift. It's a monster in and of itself, able to create and destroy lives without discrimination or any concern for those in its path. It has plagued Cardiff time and time again throughout the city's history within the Doctor Who universe. It cannot be easily controlled, only sometimes being used for good and mainly just causing catastrophes and incidents. On a structural level, it's a brilliant framing device for the city in the Doctor Who universe, and it was a great excuse for the Torchwood spin-off to exist in the first place. It's handled so well in the fiction of the show, really feeling like this mysterious and almost supernatural entity. There's so much about the Rift we still don't know, and that's why I wanted to focus on it in this lore video, because it has had such a huge impact on the show and has led to so many great stories without ever sacrificing the mystery and the wonder of the Rift as this powerful gateway to different times, places and dimensions. When it comes to Series 1, probably the most iconic new monsters are the Slitheen, as introduced in Aliens of London and World War III. Now, rather interestingly, the Slitheen aren't actually an alien race. They're just one singular family of Raxacoricofallapatorians, which have a lot of cool lore behind them both in the show and expanded media. So that's why today's lore video is going to be a bit of a deep dive into the Slitheen and their wider species. Naturally, beware spoilers for the following stories, and strap yourselves in, because this is everything you need to know about the Slitheen and Raxacoricofallapatorius. And yes, get ready to hear a lot of incomprehensible made-up alien words. You know how it is with sci-fi. I think the best place to start is with the Slitheen's home planet of Raxacoricofallapatorius in either Mutter's Spiral or the Istop Galaxy. It's important to note that this planet was part of what's known as the Raxus Alliance, which also contained the planets of Clom, Clix, and Raxacoricovarlonpatorius. Clom was the twin planet of Raxacoricofallapatorius, although there was kind of a rivalry between the two native species, as implied by the Absorbaloth in Love and Monsters. We don't know a huge amount about Clom as a planet apart from it being taken to the Medusa Cascade by the Daleks, although a popular delicacy there was the dish of land prawns. That being said, apparently tomato soup and shepherd's pie were better, so it can't be that good then. According to The Girl Who Waited, Clom also had a Disneyland at some point in the future, probably opened by Walt himself after he woke up from being cryogenically frozen. And yes, it is actually canon that Walt Disney was cryogenically frozen. The native species of Clom were the Absorbalovians, although I'll get to them properly once I reach Love and Monsters. There isn't much knowledge about Raxacoricovarlonpatorius, and all we know about Clix is the native species being named Clixians, who could manipulate and control the weather of their planet. These were tall and muscular carbon-based humanoids with claws and beaks, along with pale yellow skin and black manes. Clixians were control freaks and skilled hunters who rode the reptilian Clixian spinebacks to participate in the Grand Raxian Hunt, a traditional event the Raxus Alliance all took part in. By most accounts, Raxacoricofallapatorius was actually a very beautiful planet, with the visual dictionary describing it as lush and abundant, along with a Slitheen monster file claiming the purple atmosphere could be seen from space. The Time Traveller's Almanac reveals that its 4 poles are marked by spectacular ice caves and sapphire and chalk cliffs meet huge burgundy oceans. The Sarah Jane Adventures Flash game plant and animal habitats also adds that the planet had a vinegar sea, an ice floe, and a tall tree forest. The planet only had one major continental landmass, which is Raxus Prime, with the rest of the surface being island groups such as the islands of Hisp. The Raxacoricothalapatorians were able to swim between these islands using their powerful arms, and were able to see through blizzards with their large eyes, so they're very well adapted for life on the planet. The Time Traveller's Almanac also explains that the planet is known for the scent of cinnamon in the air, along with white popito trees, although other sources claim these have a golden trunk and reddish-brown leaves. The popito trees lived in the tall tree forests, and their calcium roots thrived in chalky soil. We also know about the plant rackweed, which was a very adaptable and fast-growing weed capable of growing anywhere, and its spores could infect other life forms and kill them quickly. Despite this, rackweed was edible and even addictive to some Raxacoricothalapatorians, such as the Slitheen blatherine as we see in The Gift, along with the use of specific sound frequencies to destroy the plants and heal anyone who had been infected by them. In terms of the fauna of Raxacoricothalapatorius, we only know of venom grubs and the Baradellskelium fatricius beast, which were giant squirrel-like animals who lived in the tall tree forests and chalky hills, specifically known for their pustules, with the Slitheen excursion introducing the phrase, "A Baradellskelium fatricius can't change its pustules." However, these creatures were hunted to extinction by the Raxacoricothalapatorians. Indeed, let's finally get to those iconic calcium-based creatures themselves. They were hatched from large tendrilled eggs in the family hatcheries, and were still considered children at the age of 12, being shorter than human children, although the adults would eventually tower over human adults and sleep in nests. Almost as soon as they're hatched, Raxacoricothalapatorians begin to educate their young in things like poetry, maths and democracy, along with disciplining them by spanking the children with Bartle-Boigle trees. On the whole, Raxacoricothalapatorians were actually quite a peaceful race, focusing on farming and making their homeworld into a paradise for them to thrive. According to the Time Traveller's Almanac, the planet's main form of contact with other worlds comes through trade in the planet's valuable spice offich. The planet itself was ruled by the Lord Predator, who governed the Grand Council, along with there being an assembly. However, despite Monsters and Villains describing this peaceful democratic species as civilized, elegant and proud, the political and legal system was strict with harsh penalties for offenders, specifically the death penalty for the most dangerous criminals. Indeed, the death sentence on Raxacoricothalapatorius was like a ritual, taking place in the Palace of Enforced Atonement, the planet's largest temple. The Raxacoricothalapatorians had these kinds of huge white marble temples built all across their world on cliff tops, but this was the largest and most significant. Monsters and Villains describes the process as follows. There, a thin solution of acetic acid would be prepared, watched by thousands of spectators in the open-air amphitheatre, all chanting the dawn prayer, "O deliver us weeping and shamed." The Slitheen would be lowered into the cauldron slowly and boiled. This acetic acid solution would be prepared in a way that only the outer skin dissolves and is eaten away, leaving the internal organs to dissolve into the boiling liquid and become soup, which is then drunk by the presiding officials and priests. Peaceful way to go then, especially when you consider that Monsters and Villains states that the prisoner remains alive for 15 to 20 seconds after they become soup, with the book literally referring to it as living soup. How delightful. According to the Visual Dictionary, Raxacoricothalapatorian society is organised entirely around its powerful families. The most important of these families was the legendary Huspic Degenerate, who controlled an illegal spice smuggling organisation and were essentially the origin of all major Raxacoricothalapatorian families. These families included the Kazine, Lilene, Pitterine, Glizine, and Hostrozine, although these are the ones we know the least about. There was also the Changline family, who were some of the earliest descendants of the Huspic Degenerate, and themselves served as ancestors to the Hanazine and Slaverine families. The Chippine and Fitterine families interbred to create the Absorbalorvian rebels, who were a family from Clom sharing ancestry from both Raxacoricothalapatorians and Absorbalovians. Similarly, the Clom colonists had a colony on Clom and eventually led to the Rakatine family, who enjoyed food from other planets and kept their past criminal dealings secret because they didn't want to be exiled and hunted down. There was also the Hanazine Blatherine family, who were orange and profited off the violent strip mining of the planet Luxonia, but we don't know much else about them. But the families don't end there, with the Arlene, Jingathene and the Hazratine, the latter being a maroon-skinned, peaceful and law-abiding race with great digestive systems allowing them to enjoy the richest foods. In the audio The Taste of Death, the Hazratine met the 10th Doctor and Rose, helping to apprehend the villainous Slitheen on the planet MXQ-1. And lastly, for the more obscure Raxacoricophalopatorian families, we have the Blon family, who are notable for being the ancestors of the Blatherine family. The grey-green Blatherine were very similar to their Slitheen cousins, although they were in constant competition with them. The Blatherine were originally peaceful and law-abiding, one of the most respected major families on the planet, with their willingness to do good and hunt down Slitheen criminals out of duty rather than for financial gain. However, by 2501, they had slipped into becoming a criminal family themselves, being controlled by their patriarch Don Arco and attempting to take control of the planet Justicia and move the entire system into others to destroy the planets with a sun flamethrower and selling the remains as nuclear fuel. However, they were stopped by the Slitheen and the 9th Doctor, who were forced to reluctantly work together. Also at some point, the Slitheen and Blatherine interbred, giving rise to the reddish-brown Slitheen Blatherine, who considered their Slitheen relatives worse, but their Blatherine relatives weak and unworthy of respect. These Raxacoricophalopatorians had very advanced technology and could remotely teleport along with using bracelets to fire lasers and hack into computers. As we see in the Sarah Jane Adventures, Tree Lawn Acre Slitheen Blatherine and Leaf Apple Glyn Slitheen Blatherine based themselves in Antarctica and hatched a scheme to cover Earth with the rackweed they were addicted to, although they were soon stopped by the Bannerman Road Gang and did an Evangelion. And of course, we have the Slitheen themselves, one of the oldest families who were born on the islands of Hisp and ultimately became the most infamous Raxacoricophalopatorians in the entire universe. The Slitheen were natural-born hunters, with their newly hatched Slitheen being hatched alone in deep underground caves, having to burrow their way out to survive and find food and sunlight, a ritual that forced only the strongest to survive. Oh, and apparently the Slitheen also engaged in cannibalism, which, you know, is always fun. As stated in Monsters and Villains, over the course of many centuries, the Slitheen established themselves as a criminal clan, infiltrating all levels of government to control distribution of offich. However, after crashing the planet's economy, they were exposed, shamed and arrested in the Great Purge of Yon 556, with more than 550 Slitheen tried and found guilty, although a large number of them were able to escape their death sentences, forcing them on the run from the Wrath Warriors, Blatherine and the Jadoon. The most notable family branch was the Pasamir Day Slitheen, who travelled to Earth in 2006 to take control of the UK government and launch a false flag attack on the planet in order to manipulate the humans into nuking Earth into oblivion, with the Slitheen ready to sell off its remains as starship fuel. However, they were stopped by the Doctor and almost wiped out entirely, even when Blon Fel Fotch was able to escape and try once again as Mayor of Cardiff, with the survivor ultimately reverted to an egg and taken back to her home planet for a second chance at life. However, it's important to note that there are a few different branches of the Slitheen family operating in their own ways, such as the Clatch Par Slitheen, who we don't know much about, and the Clep Cloth Slitheen from Death on the Mile, who wanted to steal George II's war chest from Edinburgh Castle in order to pay their debts. There was also the Lutevan Day branch, who wanted revenge for the defeat of the Pasamir Day branch, so they took over a building company named Coldfire Construction and tried to shut down the sun to destroy the Earth and sell its remnants to buy a fleet of battlecruisers to overthrow their homeworld's Grand Council. Sarah Jane and Luke Smith were able to defeat Kistmag Thek Lutevan Day Slitheen and his cousins, Gloon Fex Fizz Charlevere Slam Slitheen and Florm Rex Fey Fenaril Slam Slitheen. However, Course Lutevan Day Slitheen survived, returning later to team up with Blorm Vunga Bart Slitheen and her husband Dax Fex Fies Slitheen to get revenge on Sarah Jane and Luke and crash the moon into Earth, although they were double-crossed by the secretly evil Mr. Smith and left Earth in peace. There were also the Heppen Bear Slitheen, who became embroiled in the Justicia scheme and ultimately stole the warp hole technology to try and rebuild the family's fortune. The Slitheen excursion introduced the family Hangul Wang in the 347th century, when the Slitheen were still exiled from their home planet. The Hangul Wang branch took part in the Platonic War and were defeated by humans, so sought revenge by manipulating Earth's history and turning the planet into a temporal tourist tour for lots and lots of money. However, the 10th Doctor was able to stop them, with Mamps, Cosmo and Leap Slitheen being arrested for their scheme. The Slitheen would continue to plot against Earth and the Doctor throughout time, even appearing at Stonehenge and Trenzalore during the 11th Doctor's life, along with also invading the planet Tivoli in 2311, taking over from the Stenza and ruling the planet for over a century before they were arrested by the Jadoon in 2426. However, their most audacious scheme came in 3764. You see, when the Slitheen took control of Raxacoricofallapatorius all those years earlier, the Raxus Alliance descended into chaos, with a peace conference on Clix in 3764 seeing a last-ditch attempt to restore peace and prosperity. Senior envy of Raxacoricofallapatorius, Galida Lay Sooth Marca Jinglathene, enlisted the 9th Doctor to serve as a keynote speaker and help broker a peace. However, by this point, the Slitheen had developed much more advanced compression technology for their disguises, allowing for them to effortlessly hide within bodies of all shapes and sizes. It turned out that this 9th Doctor was himself a female Slitheen in disguise. This ultimately led to a Grand Raxian hunt, which killed a bunch of Raxacoricofallapatorians due to acid rain. This was all because Galida was actually trying to manufacture sympathy for the Raxacoricofallapatorians to give them control of the Alliance once more, but then she was arrested, although by that point the whole boiled in acid punishment wasn't really a thing anymore. Bit of a shame. So that's it for the brief history of the Raxacoricofallapatorians, the calcium-based aliens who were impervious to bullets, capable of rapid speeds, and had brutally effective claws able to behead even weeping angels. They also had an incredible sense of smell, allowing them to hunt, and the women of the species were even able to shoot poison out of their claws or their breath. Once you get past the farting of their compression skin suits, the Raxacoricofallapatorians are such an interesting species to learn about. Expanded media has fleshed them out so well by introducing all these background details and interesting facts like their efficient metabolism, their calcification on ice planets, and the concept of them losing moisture as they age, effectively turning them into stone. It's a hugely varied species full of all of these very different families, each with their own unique ways of life. Their home planet is absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to see it appear on screen properly in some form or another. I'm so glad the Raxacoricofallapatorians weren't dropped as recurring aliens after the negative reception of the Slitheen, because there's so much to explore there. So that's it for this deep dive into the Raxacoricofallapatorian species. I hope you enjoyed this video and at least learned something. As you know, I've been going through every modern episode and I've been picking out one or two things to make a video about. This time I want to talk about Harriet Jones, who we first meet in the Slitheen two-parter and later on in 2 other episodes. Doctor Who has a bunch of fictional prime ministers, but Harriet Jones is probably the most interesting, with expanded media fleshing out her time in office and what happened to her after she was forced out, including a completely different semi-official fate. So beware spoilers for the following stories, and without any further ado, this is the story of Harriet Jones. And yes, I know who she is. So what do we know about Harriet Jones? Well, according to her ID, she was born on the 3rd of June 1949 and she represented the constituency of Flydale North. We don't know when she became a Labour MP, but she seemed to have been one for a while by the time we meet her in Aliens of London, because she describes herself as being a lifelong backbencher. Now, a backbencher is basically a member of parliament who isn't a minister. They don't hold an official position in their party. Think of them as being, the majority of MPs who aren't up there with the big names. They're quietly doing their own local things for the people they represent. In Harriet's case, her big policy was the idea of cottage hospitals, with her working out a system for these smaller, more rural hospitals to not be excluded from centres of excellence, which are basically specialist clinics you tend to only really get in more urban and affluent areas. She was due to meet the Prime Minister about this policy on the day of the Slitheen's fake spaceship crash, but unknown to her, he'd been killed and stuffed into a cupboard. It's never outright confirmed in the episode, but this is intended to be then real-life Prime Minister Tony Blair, the famous war criminal. There are a couple of references to him in the episode, and his body was meant to be a Blair lookalike, so I think it's safe to say that this dead PM is Blair himself. One of the references to Blair in the episode is a mention of the so-called Blair Babes, which was the kind of sexist media term used to refer to the 101 female Labour MPs elected alongside Blair in 1997. Harriet Jones specifically mentions that she's not one of these MPs, implying she'd been elected a while before then. However, she would be propelled to the public eye by simply being in the right place at the right time. Indeed, she happened to be in 10 Downing Street on the day the Slitheen enacted their plan to destroy the Earth, meeting the Doctor and Rose and helping them fight back against the monsters. When the dust settled after the destruction of Downing Street, Harriet Jones became an iconic image as she strode towards the nearby cameras. She was a heroic survivor with words of reassurance and pride, giving her huge public support and setting her up for a massively successful time as Prime Minister, the architect of Britain's golden age, and having an unprecedented 3 successive terms in office. However, as we know, this wouldn't actually come to pass. According to the book The Secret Lives of Monsters, in the immediate aftermath of Downing Street's destruction, acting Prime Minister Harriet Jones set up an official inquiry, which detailed the lengths to which certain factions within the previous government and the security forces would go in order to cover up their own mistakes. This so-called Jones report exposed the truth of the space pig as being a hoax, successfully covering up the true events, although there were obviously many conspiracy theorists who didn't believe this disinformation. There are conflicting accounts on what the government blamed on the building's destruction, with the Secret Lives of Monsters suggesting that it was a gas leak and the unit website claiming it was a terrorist attack. On the 26th of May, acting Prime Minister Harriet Jones released a press statement paying tribute to the dead unit staff, praising the organisation for their bravery and expertise. To quote her, "I feel some deep sorrow and shame that this deception was carried out in the name of our nation and our government." However, some members of UNIT weren't particularly fond or gracious of Jones, specifically Major Jenny Maguire. On the UNIT website operations board, she wrote, "Oh, and the acting PM, some woman I've never heard of with my mother's hairdo." She was also dismissive of Harriet's admiration for the Doctor, claiming that they all go through that starry-eyed phase. Although she still went to meet with a new Prime Minister at the acting office in Westminster, because obviously there wasn't a Downing Street anymore. So, a big part of Harriet's time in office was rebuilding Big Ben and Downing Street. According to the Christmas Invasion novelisation, Harriet's first week as Prime Minister was a blur of photo calls and official cars and new information, and the first time she had descended into the unit facility. The Secret Lives of Monsters has a newspaper article about the new Prime Minister written by Vivian Rook, comparing her to the famously controversial first female British PM, Margaret Thatcher. Jones was obviously not fond of these comparisons, pointing out how it was unhelpful and a bit sexist because, they were both women and that was the only reason they were being compared. Although she conceded that there were actual similarities, saying, "I think you could say that we both are immensely proud of the people of our great nation and the people of our planet, that we would place unwavering trust in the human race." Reading that, I guess Doctor Who Thatcher was a little bit different to our own.
Thatchers?
When the Guinevere 1 probe was reported missing by UNIT, Major Richard Blake was a bit dismissive when talking about Harriet Jones. He speculated that she would use it as an excuse to visit UNIT's Tower of London base, and when she arrived, he wrote a memo telling other UNIT staff to be respectful towards her, but also to not let her think she owns the place. However, the novelisation reveals that Harriet had always liked Major Blake because, and I quote, "he had been so gracious, not condescending, like many of the civil servants she had met, or patronising like the military generals who assumed she wouldn't have a clue what she was talking about." So she was very shocked and upset when Major Blake was killed by the Sycorax. In terms of Harriet's family, we don't know anything about her parents apart from her mother still being alive during the Slitheen crisis, but the Christmas Invasion novelisation also mentions her granddad, who spent a few years in Venezuela trying to buy a gold mine and losing every penny. Harriet claimed he told her all sorts of stories about the rebel factions coming down from the mountains and raiding the townships, so he always knew when a raid was being planned, information Harriet was able to draw upon during the Sycorax incident. Indeed, the Christmas Invasion takes place within Jones's first or second year as Prime Minister, depending on which dating method you use, because things can be quite messy in the Doctor Who universe. When the Guinevere 1 probe went missing, Jones was busy implementing new policies. At some point before the episode, she had introduced financial reforms so that people including Jackie Tyler were £18 a week better off. According to the novelisation, she was also going to solidify her cottage hospital scheme on January 1st of the following year, resulting in better healthcare for all. However, these plans were cut short when the Guinevere probe was hijacked by the villainous Sycorax, who began their invasion of the planet Earth on Christmas Day. During this incident, Harriet fell out of her depth, with the novelisation explaining that she was worried about having to protect every child across the UK. Her inner monologue specifically stating this was worse than her first Prime Minister's questions. Hey, at least she didn't have to do a Paxman on Newsnight.
You don't deserve to live.
The Sycorax invasion was a very complicated political situation for Jones to navigate. She probably would have been killed or forced to surrender if the Doctor hadn't stepped in. As we see in the episode, she was relying on him to help them, but his absence made her more critical of him, proving Major Maguire right to call her admiration a starry-eyed phase. One of Harriet's key policies was national defence, something we see as she commands Torchwood to destroy the fleeting Sycorax ship, which puts her at odds with the Doctor. The novelisation explains her reasoning for this, showing she was very reluctant to do it, but, and again, I quote, "She was Prime Minister, she had a duty of care, a responsibility that went well beyond her own wishes. She did what she did to protect her people, especially because she saw how the Sycorax leader had gone against his word to yield, so she was convinced Earth wouldn't be safe by letting the invaders leave in peace. However, this compelled the Doctor to depose her by calling her health into question. Indeed, the Time Traveller's Almanac states that after Alex Klein's unit debrief, a media and political storm had forced Jones from office. According to the Daily Telegraph in Love and Monsters, Harold Saxon was gaining popularity in March after unveiling the Archangel network at the start of the year, which was now earning him 61% support in opinion polls. An unpopular Prime Minister was forced to announce that the government's new Defence Minister would be Harold Saxon, although it's unclear if this was referring to Harriet or a successor we don't know about. After her downfall, former Prime Minister Harriet Jones retired to an old house in the country and devoted herself to finding ways to protect the planet from alien aggressors. She took a reduced political role and made very few public appearances, but The Secret Lives of Monsters shows that she wrote an opinion piece in the Daily News after the Rachnos invasion, praising Minister of Defence Harold Saxon on his actions to destroy the spaceship. She thanked his courage and judgment for saving the Earth, especially because it justified her belief that the planet needed to look after itself in the absence of the Doctor. However, when the independent candidate Saxon won the election with a landslide majority, Vivian Rook once again interviewed Jones, who was now less optimistic about the new Prime Minister. This interview reveals that Harriet was rested and relaxed without the strain of being a world leader. She said the following about being removed from office: "It was a bit of a surprise. After all, I had just helped save the world from an alien invasion. But then again, much the same thing happened to Churchill." Indeed, rather famously, despite navigating the UK through World War II and becoming a significantly popular wartime leader, Winston Churchill lost his position as Prime Minister when the Conservatives lost the 1945 general election. However, Jones was still an MP, returning to the backbenches, although she only gave occasional speeches in the House. Her goal was once again the cottage hospital scheme, something boosted by the public's distrust of hospitals like Royal Hope after it was taken to the moon. She wanted healthcare centres to be small, good and friendly, specifically mentioning Ledworth as an example. This article also reveals that Harriet's party itself didn't last very long after she left, and she was pretty paranoid about Saxon because, while she conceded that he was a charming man and he seemed to be what the country needed on paper, she had done some digging, claiming there are more questions about Harold Saxon than there are answers. And obviously she would be vindicated when Saxon turned out to be the Master, killed the US President and tried to take over the universe with a bunch of future human killing machines. But to be honest, he's still probably not one of the UK's worst Prime Ministers though. In the years after losing her position as Prime Minister, Jones worked with the Mr. Copper Foundation to develop the Subwave Network, a system which could intuitively seek out the Doctor's allies in the event of his absence during a major alien incident. She was forced to use this network when the Daleks moved Earth into the Medusa Cascade and began to invade the planet. Jones contacted Sarah Jane Smith, Martha Jones and Torchwood 3 so they could all work together to contact the 10th Doctor. This once again validated Jones's doubts of his reliability, with her stating that she still stood by her actions against the Sycorax. Thanks to the Subwave network, the so-called Children of Time were able to reach the Doctor and help him make it to Earth, where he ultimately stopped the invasion. However, in sending the message, Harriet exposed her own location and was seemingly killed by the Daleks in a defiant act of self-sacrifice, once again putting the people of her country first. And this was originally where her story ended. You see, showrunner Russell T Davies had debated using a different character to be behind the Subwave network, including Elton Pope, Polly Wright, or Tegan Javanka. However, he chose Harriet as a favour to Phil Collinson, the producer of the show, whose favourite character was Harriet Jones. Despite this favour, Davies killed the character off, which, caused Collinson to playfully nag his friends in the years after. Therefore, when Davies worked on the book Now We Are 600, he changed the fate of Harriet so that she escaped through a trapdoor and fled on a motorbike into the helicarrier of Miss Fitzpatrick's collection, a cabal of billionaires, which somehow played into the grand plans of the trickster. Davies considers this outcome official, claiming, "She's my character, that's my episode, I say that's true." So I guess if you want to count Jack Harkness being the face of Bo, you have to count Harriet Jones magically escaping the Daleks, which kind of ruins the point of the scene. But can't have one without the other, so everyone that roasted me for not accepting the face of Bo stuff, now you have to accept this too. So, that's the rollercoaster tale of Harriet Jones, whose autobiography was banned by an Act of Parliament. In terms of alternate timelines, she was the leader of the opposition in a parallel universe Rose Tyler visited on her travels through dimensions, along with never having become PM in another dimension. In the Peatswell parallel universe, Harriet Jones became president and ushered in a golden age, although we don't know anything further. The Harriet Jones of the main universe is such a fascinating character who shows the nuances of being a significant person in the Doctor Who universe. She had to prioritise prioritize the safety of her people, which explains her actions in the Christmas invasion. I really like how expanded media has been able to elaborate on her thought process during this moment, along with giving us indications of what her life was like during and after her time as Prime Minister. After all, she had a lot of alien stuff to deal with, being propelled into the role of Prime Minister off vibes alone, despite being a lowly backbencher for almost all her political career. She's a fascinating example of how time in Doctor Who is in flux and can change so dramatically based on one single event. What would Britain's Golden Age have looked like? Well, we'll never know. And on that note, that's it for this deep dive into Harriet Jones. Now, since we're at the episode Dalek, you were probably expecting this video to be all about the Daleks themselves, but, you know, good luck finding anyone actually willing to make an entire history of the iconic villains who have the most inconsistent timeline of like any villains in any media ever. Instead, when it comes to Series 1, I love how so many characters have deep backstories and histories fleshed out in expanded media or tie-in materials. One of my favourite examples of this is Henry Van Statten, the arrogant billionaire owner of the Metaltron Dalek. He was always a fun antagonistic character, but there's actually a lot more to his story than we see on screen, including what happened to him after the events of the episode. So watch out for spoilers for the Dalek novelisation, and without any further ado, this is everything you need to know about Henry Van Statten.
Bring him in, let's see him, and tell Simmons I want to visit my little pet. Get to it!
We don't know exactly when Henry Van Statten was born, although the Dalek novelisation claims he was 53 when the events of the episode take place. Using some quick maths, that means he would have been born around 1959. Henry was the son of Edward Van Statten, the billionaire founder and owner of the Van Statten Corporation, which was a business specialising in arms dealing and oil during the latter half of the 20th century. Oh, so I guess they'd fit in perfectly as, a football club owner in the 21st century. Despite the success of the company, Edward and Henry had a very strained and distant relationship because Edward would always be away on business trips with Russian bankers during Henry's childhood. Again, they were perfect for buying a football club. Henry was forced to spend his childhood in isolation in a housing complex within the Utah desert. The novelisation explains that Henry was left in the care of Otto von Donitz, who worked for Edward and was tasked with educating and caring for the billionaire's son. Henry and Otto became close, and on the kid's 7th birthday, Otto bought him a telescope under the pretense of it being a gift from Edward himself, so that Henry could demonstrate his ambition to one day reach the stars. However, when Edward found out about this, he was furious because he thought staring at the stars only made people think things couldn't be achieved. Therefore, he fired Otto and had the telescope destroyed to teach his son a lesson. Just billionaire problems, I guess. By Henry's 15th birthday, which would have been around 1974, his father was dying of an unspecified disease, so he gave his son a small gift of $1 million. Just a little bit of pocket change to help get Henry going and learning the values of hard work.
It's not been easy for me. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.
Edward hoped his son could prove himself worthy of running the Van Statten Corporation after his death. However, rather than investing this small sum of money into oil and arms dealing like Edward wanted, Henry instead used the economic knowledge he'd gained from Otto to invest in telecommunications and the internet, which were both emergent industries around that time. Naturally, Edward was frustrated about this apparent waste of a small fortune, but he still reluctantly signed the corporation over to his son rather than his own lawyers. Henry had assured him that his skill in investing would ensure Edward's name would survive beyond his death, with these assurances convincing Edward that his son was the only one skilled enough to take over the corporation from him. Henry Van Statten then took over the Van Statten Corporation, and the change in direction to communications proved to be incredibly successful for the company. When his father eventually succumbed to his illness, Henry made all his workers mourn Edward for 10 minutes, just to then fire them all so he could rebuild the corporation from the ground up to achieve his dream of reaching the stars. Or at least, bringing the stars to himself by seeking out and collecting alien artifacts.
I wanted to touch the star!
You just want to drag the stars down and stick them on the ground!
In 1999, Henry Van Statten renamed the corporation Geocomtex, which was founded to tackle the Y2K bug. This was a big scare leading up to the year 2000, where computers weren't able to tell the year 2000 apart from 1900, which caused a few issues regarding banking and bills and stuff like that. It was just a minor issue that IT had to deal with. Although according to media sensationalization and misinformation, the whole world would explode on New Year's Eve and the planet's population would face a post-apocalyptic nightmare with no food and no water. Naturally, that didn't actually happen, but Geocomtech still became a hugely successful and influential corporation, eventually using scavenged technology from the Roswell crash to develop broadband and scraping a Russian crater for the cure for the common cold, although Van Statten kept it secret from the public so he could make more money.
Oh, I am so gonna patent this.
So that's your secret. You don't just collect this stuff, you scavenge it.
It's notable that there was actually a real Geocomtech website created as a tie-in for Doctor Who Series 1, which gives us a nice window into how the fictional company operated. They stylized themselves as being a company that loves you and a company you can rely on. Their website reads, "We like your life to be simpler. We like to be in control." Definitely not a red flag there, especially since they secretly owned the entire internet. The website also lists some of their products, including IE core chip transistors, bubble memory, ether beams sensing technology, and bonded polycarbon. There's also an FAQ page which is full of technobabble like flange differentials, Discotron 3s, and Finkelgrubers. Lastly, the website boasts that the company makes the best computers in the world which never break down, along with the best internet access which is swift and never goes down during the download of files. Indeed, by 2012, Geocomtech was the world's leading electronics company and even provided security system software, so it really was a juggernaut in the industry by the time we meet Van Statten in the episode, essentially generating infinite money for this increasingly narcissistic and erratic billionaire. The 13 years after Geocomtech's establishment saw an even wealthier and more egotistical Van Statten building up his collection of alien artifacts. He even gave an interview to Mickey Smith's Who Is Doctor Who website in 2006 after the Slitheen invasion, and offered Geocomtech's products as a prize for the reader with the best reason for wanting to meet an alien. This interview gives us a few indications as to what Van Statten was like at this point in his life, along with revealing that he grew up watching Star Wars and dreamed of being an astronaut and going to Mars. Henry was an outspoken public believer in aliens and how often they had come to Earth previously. The first part of his collection was a bit of moondust he had come across at an ammo fair, but he then began to use his Geocomtech wealth to build up his collection by trading on the so-called grey market. This collection included things like unidentified scraps of metal, a hugely heavy lump of rock the size of a Jolly Rancher, and his underground vault in Utah housed things like a Cyberman head, the milometer from the Roswell crash, the arm of a Raxacrocophalopasaurian, a xenomorph egg, various meteorites, an ape man head, a giant beetle, an earth reptile head, and an alien lizard.
The stuff on nightmares reduced to an exhibit. I'm getting old.
However, the most prized possession of Van Statten's collection would come into his ownership in 2012, around the time of his 53rd birthday. When he had turned 45, Henry decided to finally acquire a living alien specimen rather than just bits of dead ones. According to The Secret Lives of Monsters, Van Statten bought the Metaltron at a private auction over the internet, which required $1 million just to access. However, the Dalek novelization claims he tracked the Metaltron down to Hiram Duchesne, the American CEO of an ice cream company. Hiram had grown up as a middle-class businessman, and he was able to secretly buy the Metaltron, which had crashed on Earth in the 60s, after having fought the War Doctor during the fall of Arcadia in the Time War. The Metaltron had been part of many different collections since it crashed on Earth, always managing to escape the hands of UNIT, who were desperate to own the so-called Code D, although their interest only ever seemed to heighten the price of the Metaltron. Henry Van Statten was desperate to buy it off Hiram, offering him $25 million only to be refused. This led to a furious Van Statten buying out the other man's company entirely, hoping to force him into accepting the money he now desperately needed. Despite being bankrupted by this, Hiram still wouldn't budge. However, when he discovered he had cancer, he reluctantly agreed to sell the Metaltron to Van Statten after hearing rumours Henry's scientists had developed a cure using alien technology. As Van Statten's 8-year quest finally came to an end and he was able to at last own a living alien specimen, Hiram mocked Van Statten and left him with a lasting dare to make the creature talk.
I am Henry Van Statten, now recognize me!
After securing the Metaltron, Van Statten became a bit of a recluse, spending almost all of his time at his vault. This was a private museum near Salt Lake City, Utah, 53 floors below the surface. Anywhere from 200 to 400 people worked at this vault. These included Adam Mitchell and his roommate Sven, who was replaced by Adam and had his memory wiped before being sent off to Scandinavia, despite him being from Switzerland. There was also Aaron Denton, who suffered from extreme headaches only curable by inflicting pain upon other living beings. He agreed to work for Van Statten in exchange for being freed from prison, and he gave himself a new identity, naming himself Danny Simmons after a child he had attacked in school and later killed. So, you know, Van Statten only works with the best people, you know, trust that recruitment ad on their website. They really want the best. Lastly, for the significant characters in the vault, there are Owen Bywater and Diana Goddard. According to the Dalek novelization, these two were actually undercover FBI agents in a relationship with one another. Bywater was from Chicago with Irish ancestry and became security commander in the vault, while Goddard started off as a guard and rose to chief of staff when the impulsive Van Statten took a liking to her. The book reveals that Goddard joined the FBI after being inspired by her dead cop father, and she wanted to make the world a better place, uncomfortable with working for Van Statten even if it was undercover. The FBI were investigating Van Statten due to his influence on the world stage. After all, he'd grown so rich and powerful that he was able to dictate the outcomes of elections and replace the president of the USA on a whim, like we see at the beginning of the episode.
The president is 10 points down. I want him replaced.
I don't think that's very wise, sir.
Thank you so much for your opinion. You're fired.
In the Dalek novel, Goddard places Van Statten under arrest after the failed ambush against the Dalek, but obviously this conflicts with what we see in the episode itself. The novelization also sees Van Statten wipe his own memory after the Dalek shows him a vision of brutally killing everyone he had ever harmed. Van Statten then mentally regressed to an infant, with Goddard arranging to take care of him in the state he was in. However, the episode sees a more ruthless Goddard usurping Van Statten entirely and willingly wiping his memory like he himself had done to others. To the general public, this eccentric billionaire simply disappeared under mysterious circumstances, with the book The Doctor, His Lives and Times showing he was dumped in the Californian city of Sacramento.
Henry Van Statten will be a homeless, brainless junkie living on the streets of San Diego, Seattle, Sacramento.
On the 2nd of May 2012, Van Statten was accosted by police at Riverside Boulevard in Greenhaven for causing a public disturbance in the early hours of the morning. He was described as being a homeless, brainless junkie and refused to cooperate with the officers cautioning him, and he just repeated, "Don't you know who I am?" over and over again, clearly showing he had some lingering memories of some kind to his previous life. One of the officers involved with the information bulletin noted that this unnamed vagrant looked a bit like Henry Van Statten, only to be mocked and denied by another officer. This was the last known appearance of the billionaire who once owned the internet itself, and it was a very humiliating end for such an arrogant and ambitious character.
Take him away, wipe his memory, and leave him by the road someplace.
You can't do this to me! I am Henry Van Statten!
So, that's the story of Henry Van Statten, who so desperately wanted to touch the stars that he brought them to him, only to pay the ultimate price by getting almost 200 people killed by his prized possession and being dumped in Sacramento with no memory. All this expanded media paints a pretty bittersweet and almost tragic picture of Van Statten. He was a child who grew up without a dad, growing up dreaming about being able to meet aliens or reach the stars he loved to look up at. However, he allowed ruthlessness and selfishness to consume him as he sought to own everything, losing sight of the inspiration a small little telescope had once given him. It's fascinating to see how well expanded media fleshes him out and his company, giving us a much more layered understanding of his personality and why he acts the way he does throughout the episode and the novelization. Like I said with Clive, it's great how we get to learn so much more about these random side characters and what led them up to the point we meet them in the episode, giving them an entire life of their own and reminding you that yes, these are individual people with their own pasts and full backstories. So, that being said, I hope you liked this video, or at least learned something new about Henry Van Statten, whose prestigious vault was filled with cement and left to be forgotten about, only living on in the artifacts stolen by people like Adam Mitchell and Lady Christina D'Souza. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time when we talk about Doctor Who's Forgotten Companion. Something I find really interesting about Series 1 that a lot of people seem to forget is how it had a straight up failed companion who got kicked out of the TARDIS. In Dalek we were introduced to the character of Adam Mitchell, who found himself thrown out at the end of the long game. But what a lot of people don't know is that his story doesn't actually stop there. He has a whole follow-up story arc in expanded media, seeing what happened to him after that episode. So I thought this video would be the perfect time to delve into the life of Adam Mitchell before and after his appearances in the show. Beware spoilers for the following stories, and get ready because this is the companion Doctor Who forgot.
Go and canoodle or spoon or whatever it is you British do.
According to the Dalek novelisation, Adam was born in Milton Keynes in 1993 to Jeff and Sandra Mitchell. He was always a bit of a bratty and manipulative child, spending his entire 7th year of age refusing to speak under any circumstances, just as an experiment. No matter how hard his parents pleaded and how many therapy sessions he was forced to attend, Adam simply didn't speak for an entire year, only speaking again on his 8th birthday because he decided he couldn't get any more data from being silent. And then to top it all off, when he was 8, Adam hacked into the USA's Department of Defense computers and almost caused World War III with the chaos he unleashed. And as we see in the episode Dalek, when Adam recounts this event, he's proud of it and brags about the panicked government workers running about, rather than, showing any kind of remorse for almost destroying the entire planet as we know it. So it was clear from the beginning that whilst Adam was a very gifted and talented child, he had a very selfish mean streak buried within him, along with a stark lack of taking accountability for his actions. However, Adam wasn't all bad when he was a kid, as we can see in his winning essay on Mickey Smith's Who is the Doctor website, which coincidentally had been started by Clive Finch. By this point, Adam was 14 and lived in Nottingham, with his essay coming across as quite an optimistic view of aliens. He wanted to see the stars and learn from advanced races, whom he believed weren't evil and could teach humans a lot, improving our lives. He hoped that aliens would be able to cure his father's arthritis with their advanced knowledge of science and anatomy. I feel like this humanises Adam a lot, explaining his later actions because he was desperate for humanity to develop and advance, even if that would mess with the actual timeline of Earth. Adam simply wanted to learn from more advanced species who could help us in exchange for things like Shakespeare and other cultural things. This essay won the website's competition, which was sponsored by Henry Van Statten himself, who had offered Geocomtech's hardware to the winner. The competition had a lot of entries, all part of the fiction of the website of course, but the winner was ultimately young Adam Mitchell.
Adam was saying that all his life he wanted to see the stars.
Time to go and stand outside then.
At some point in the following years, the Mitchell family moved either back to Milton Keynes or to Manchester, and then Jeff died, although there isn't any information about the specifics of his death. According to the Dalek novelisation, Adam joined Geocomtech after Van Statten was impressed by his IQ tests. He was recruited to work in the vault alongside a Swiss man named Sven, with both men in sole control of the inanimate objects within the complex, and being forced to share a room to Adam's disdain. The book explains that one night Adam was kidnapped by guards led by Simmons and taken to see the Dalek inside the cage, which was apparently a process all new vault workers were put through. The book also explains that at this point the Dalek was named Pepper Potnick, with Adam being the one to suggest its new name, Metaltron. During Adam's time working with Sven, Chief of Staff Diane Goddard advised him to find inventive explanations for all the alien items, something which ultimately gained Van Statten's favour and respect. One day the boss asked Adam if he wanted a room of his own, an offer Adam immediately accepted despite knowing these actions had consequences. Therefore, rather than giving Adam a new room, Van Statten simply had Sven's memories wiped in front of him, dumping the Swiss man in Scandinavia and cementing Adam as the new sole alien researcher for the inanimates. Despite now having the position to himself, Adam naturally and understandably became very paranoid of undergoing a similar fate, so began to stockpile alien weapons in the hopes of defending himself if the same thing ever happened to him. By the time we meet Adam in the episode Dalek, which takes place in 2012, meaning Adam is 19 or 20, he had started working quite closely with Van Statten to the extent that he even represented the billionaire at auctions, buying new artifacts for Van Statten to keep at the vault. Adam met the Doctor and Rose and became smitten with his compatriot, desperate to impress her and bump uglies. Despite Adam clashing with the Doctor, who, really didn't like the kid, he made more of an impression on Rose, leading to her convincing the Doctor to let him travel with them in the TARDIS and allow Adam to finally see the stars.
He's your boyfriend.
Not anymore.
Interestingly, there is actually a Big Finish story set between Dalek and the Long Game. The other side sees the Doctor trying to take Adam home, only for a temporal tsunami to knock the TARDIS off course and send it to Birmingham in 2012. It was here where they encountered the Bygone Horde, a group of species who were erased from existence during the Time War, being left as echoes displaced from time on a plane of non-reality. Here, this Bygone Horde decided to work together and emerged on Earth, where they wanted to sacrifice the human race to return their existence. Adam was initially not very helpful, but he soon began to show his worth and helped the Doctor and Rose defeat the Horde, finally convincing the Doctor to accept him as a companion. Big Finish did leave the ending of this story open enough for more adventures, but then, no, that won't be happening. Adam's brief time in the TARDIS took him to Satellite 5 in the year 200,000, where he was overwhelmed at finally seeing the stars and looking down at the surface of the planet he called home. After all, this was what he'd always wanted, but it also caused him to fall into the trap of greed, wanting all the answers the future had for him. All those years earlier, Adam had been determined to meet aliens and learn their secrets, being taught all these wonderful advancements. Therefore, he had infospike technology installed within his forehead, giving him access to computers and allowing him to transmit his findings back home. This act of selfishness almost spelled doom for the Doctor and Rose, giving the villainous Jagrafest knowledge of the TARDIS and almost stealing the key itself. Naturally, the Doctor was furious about this and took the unremorseful Adam back home, kicking him out of the TARDIS for his breach of trust. It's clear that Adam only began to apologise because he was caught and the Doctor was angry at him, rather than, genuinely being sorry, further justifying the Doctor's choice in booting him out. Due to his infospike, Adam was forced to live a quiet life and stay out of trouble because he might get dissected otherwise. However, as detailed in the Prisoners of Time comic series, this all changed when Adam's mother died of a brain embolism, which is essentially a stroke, a blood clot blocking off oxygen and blood flow to the brain. Adam blamed the Doctor for this, believing that the information from the future could have saved Sandra from her fate, but obviously the Doctor had erased it all. After a lifetime of laying low, Adam began to see the pair of travellers cropping up throughout history without him, so he decided to get his revenge. Using his infospike technology, Adam began to steal from corporate accounts and build a private wealth he could use to enact his plan. He raided Van Statten's vault and used Cyberman technology to lure out and freeze time agent Neil Shaw, stealing his vortex manipulator to give Adam his own access to time and space travel. Now that he had the ability to travel throughout time and space, Adam began to search the universe for the Doctor's enemies, hoping to use them against the Time Lord who had wronged him. One of the first enemies he encountered was the so-called Treeless incarnation of the Master, who began to help the jaded human on his quest for revenge. Adam began to travel throughout the Doctor's timeline, starting with the first Doctor where he worked alongside the Zarbi to kidnap Barbara, Ian and Vicky. He then continued to stalk the Doctor during his adventures, capturing all his companions and using memory distortion to avoid the Doctor remembering Adam. However, by his 5th and 6th incarnations, the Doctor was able to start remembering him since the distortion weakened as he got closer to the 9th Doctor. The 8th Doctor, who had returned to San Francisco to convince Grace Holloway to travel with him again, anticipated the arrival of this mysterious cloaked figure, but Adam was still able to take Grace away. After the 9th Doctor and Rose escaped from an adventure at the monument to Drake Alborn of Altair 7, an older Adam finally revealed himself to his former travelling companions. He explained his life of torment to the Doctor and continued to blame the man for everything, because after all, this was the incarnation that had kicked him out. This was the version of the Doctor he hated the most. So he confronted him face to face, even kicking the 9th Doctor when he was already down, and taking Rose away. Adam would go on to kidnap other modern companions like Captain Jack, Martha, Donna, Amy and Rory, Clara and even Brian Williams and Jenny. You see, Adam had created a fortress within the time vortex itself, where he was keeping all these companions in stasis as part of his plan. After the 11th Doctor travelled to Van Statten's vault and unfroze Neil Shaw, he was able to track Adam back to his fortress, only to walk right into his trap. The former companion once again scolded the Doctor for mistreating him, and gave a big speech about how the Doctor views his companions, how he uses them for his own purposes and abandons them when he gets bored. It's then that Adam revealed his ultimate plan. He would kill every single companion, wiping out all the Doctor's friends except one. And to twist the knife, Adam would force the Doctor to choose which one lived. However, by meddling with time, Adam opened the door for all incarnations of the Doctor to convene in his fortress, and when Adam tried to kill the companions, it turned out that the shapeshifting Frobisher had actually pretended to be Perry in order to be captured, infiltrating the fortress and acting as the remote, preventing Adam's plan from succeeding. Not to be defeated so easily, Adam and the Master summoned an army of Autons to fight against all the Doctors and companions. It was during this fight that the Master revealed his ultimate plan, to overload every TARDIS at once and wipe out all of time and space, unravelling time itself and wiping everything clean, so to speak. Adam was shocked by this, deeming it genocide, going too far even by his standards. Faced with the helpless Doctors and companions begging for him to save them, Adam finally saw the light and realised that the Master had been using him all along. The renegade Time Lord stabbed Adam, who sacrificed his own life to destroy the computer systems and prevent the Master's destruction of space and time. As Adam lay dying in Rose's arms, he apologised to the Doctors and realised why the companions were willing to risk so much for the Doctor, with Adam finally gaining respect from the 9th Doctor and redeeming himself. The Doctors and companions then buried Adam outside of his fortress, with the gravestone declaring, "Adam Mitchell, a companion true." After his climactic sacrifice for the man he had grown to hate so much, Adam Mitchell was finally recognised as a companion by the Doctor, with the 11th Doctor specifically the last to remain at his grave. So, that was the bittersweet life of boy genius Adam Mitchell and his heroic redemption despite all his wrongdoings. I feel like expanded media really fleshed his character out, making his story a bit more sympathetic. Sure, he was arrogant and bragged about doing bad things, refusing to take responsibility or accountability for his actions, but at times he did have good intentions. He didn't want all the future technology to make himself rich, he just wanted to help people like his parents with scientific advancements we didn't have access to yet. He's a prime example of people who can't respect the rules and boundaries of time travel, slipping into that trap of greed, and yet you can understand why he blamed the Doctor for his mother's death, since he had to live with the knowledge that any hope of saving her was quite literally destroyed by the Doctor. Even though the Doctor was justified in doing so and kicking Adam out, it's a great way of showing the difficult ethics regarding time travel, and I love how his story was resolved, becoming this vengeful antagonist so far removed from the starry-eyed essay-writing teenager. Adam deserved to be kicked out of the TARDIS, he brought that on himself in the long game, but he was left abandoned in a world he had to hide from out of fear, with that resentment of the Doctor building and building until it reached a boiling point. It's very easy to see how he got to that point, and I think Prisoners of Time was the logical next step for a character like this. Adam Mitchell is another fantastic example of a side character whose backstory and identity was fleshed out through expanded media outside of the show. Things like the Dalek novelization add a lot of interesting layers to his character, even if that character is now very much tainted by the actor that played him. As we all know, Doctor Who is all about space and time travel, allowing the main character to gallivant around the universe throughout its history and get up to all kinds of hijinks. But time travel is naturally a tricky thing to navigate, because of its paradoxes and other assorted risks. The Series 1 episode Father's Day introduces us to one of the most interesting of these risks, with the terrifying Reapers, who are entities living within the time vortex itself and feast upon paradoxes. The Reapers have always been one of my personal favourite Doctor Who villains, but what actually are they, and why haven't they appeared more often? Well, that's what I'll be talking about on today's Doctor Who Series 1 lore video. Beware spoilers for the stories on screen now, and get ready, because this is everything you need to know about the Reapers. No, not the ones from Mass Effect. Get in the church! But before we talk about the Reapers, I think it's really important to understand what the time vortex actually is. Despite appearing often, especially in modern title sequences, the show has rarely ever delved into what it is or how it works. It's just kind of there and always makes a good visual, but expanded media has really fleshed it out and added a lot more dimensions to it, almost literally. The novelization of The Chase describes it as existing outside of any normal frame of reference. To quote the book, within it, light, darkness, matter and energy all blend, divide, shift and change. It underlines the whole of creation, touching the normal universe only slightly. Its pathways are twisted, unstable and hard to follow. A really interesting aspect of the vortex is that it seems to have an actual set geography, it's not just random pathways. The book The Crystal Bucephalus suggests that there are surfaces, oceans and a substrate that all make up the physical structure of the vortex, which paints a very different picture to what we usually see in the show now. According to the audio Neverland, there are specific entrances to the time vortex that could be completely blocked off to prevent access, and on the perimeter of the vortex exists something known as a time spiral, which is a mysterious phenomenon so powerful it can rip apart an entire TARDIS and its passengers if they happen to come too close to it. We don't know a whole lot of details about these time spirals, but there also seems to be one at the so-called vortex core, which I can only assume is, like the center of the time vortex. So there are clearly serious obstacles and phenomena that exist within the time vortex, making travel even more difficult than the Doctor makes it seem. Naturally, the vortex has always been closely related to the Time Lords, allowing them to control time itself. A good man goes to war suggests that millions of years of exposure to the vortex is part of the process allowing Gallifreyans to become Time Lords thanks to the untempered schism, a gap in the fabric of reality and a natural entrance to the vortex as a whole. According to myths and legends, Omega was the first Time Lord to ever enter the time vortex, and Rassilon later anchored the vortex, allowing the Time Lords to conquer time travel and establish themselves as an empire. Other species like the Daleks Vortex could also use it, but the Time Lords were by far the most proficient and effective at navigating the Vortex. Without the right equipment or the proper precautions, it's almost impossible to survive travelling through the Time Vortex. Like we see in Enemy of the World and Utopia, humans die from even a short amount of exposure to the Vortex. But that doesn't make it completely inhospitable. There are still plenty of entities that live within the Vortex despite all of its dangers and hazards. You have lesser species like the Time Vortex leeches, which are cute little critters latching onto the engines of space-time vessels. There are also time roaches, nesting creatures that feed on radiation leaks, and lastly there are the insectoid Pantophagon, who can devour entire metal cities and swarms. These three species are more opportunistic and not hugely sentient, they just kind of take advantage of the ships using the Vortex itself, although we don't really know how they came to exist to begin with. However, more prominent native entities include the Vortisaurs, who are huge pterodactyl-like creatures introduced in Storm Warning. They're also a bit of a scavenger race drawn once again to the radiation of travellers, but there's a little bit more depth to them because the Time Lords themselves rode these birds of prey, like the 8th Doctor does in No More Lies. On a higher level of sentience are the terrifying Vortex Rays, which I mean, just come on, just look at the name, that's terrifying. These are drawn to disastrous events to make them worse, but we don't really know a huge amount of them. However, the Time Lords outright feared these creatures and built specific defences into their TARDISes so as to not be noticed by the Wraiths. So it's interesting that there are entities in there that even the Time Lords find threatening, and by far one of the most threatening of these are the Ravenous, who were originally the peaceful Kolstani living on the planet Kolstan in the Vortex itself. You know, you might call it an impossible planet. However, when Rassilon attacked them, they began to feel nothing but hunger, becoming the Ravenous. These absolutely horrifying clown-like monsters evolved specifically to feed on regeneration, making them the natural predators of the Time Lords, and they hunted them during the old times, only for different incarnations of the Master to eventually defeat them in the present and restore the Kolstani to life, although their planet remained destroyed. You know, they didn't exactly get compensation for that. The Time Vortex was also home to chronivores and other transcendental beings like the Eternals and the Guardians of Time, all of whom were like gods to the majority of the universe. They all had immense power and could influence the very laws of time and space with ease, but they're a story for another time. This brings us back to the Reapers, who are another species native to the Time Vortex and are linked to time itself. These gargoyle-like creatures also reside in the Morass, an alternate dimension vortex thing where time and space have been torn apart, but their main presence is in the main universe, where they seek out disturbances in time as we see in Father's Day. The Reapers are very powerful entities, able to completely devour anything in their path and even deactivate TARDISes. It's almost impossible to harm them, but they can be blocked by physical objects like churches. As shown in Father's Day, the only real way to fight back against the Reapers is to repair the damage to the timeline that allowed them in to begin with, like when Pete Tyler dies and maintains the original timeline of events. However, this wasn't the Doctor's first or last battle against the Reapers. The short story Toil and Trouble sees the 4th Doctor using them to defeat the Carrionites, and the 4 Doctors comic story sees the 10th, 11th and 12th Doctors accidentally summoning the Reapers to Paris in 1923, with the monsters chasing the 11th Doctor specifically, even breaking into the 12th Doctor's TARDIS as they chase him. However, the 3 incarnations were able to trick the Reapers while they were inside the TARDIS, and you know, as far as I can tell, that's like their last appearance. Apart from these stories, the Reapers have barely returned in Doctor Who media despite their fascinating vulture-like setup, as they constantly lurk, waiting for paradoxes to feast upon. And since Doctor Who is full of paradoxes, it really begs the question of why they have barely featured since their introduction in Father's Day. So, as mentioned in Father's Day, the Reapers were usually kept in check by the Time Lords before, you know, they all got blown up in the Time War. They were usually the ones preventing these exact kind of paradox, but after the Time Lords were wiped out, they couldn't hold back the Reapers anymore, which is why they appear in that episode and not earlier. However, a big thing people seem to overlook is that they're tied to fixed points and something known as the Blinovitch limitation effect. This is a theory in the Doctor Who universe created by the Russian physicist Aaron Blinovitch in 1928, and it regards crossing over into your own timeline and interacting with the past or future version of yourself, thus causing a paradox breaking the first law of time. Of course, there are some exceptions like the Brigadier and Mordwin Undead and any multi-Doctor story, because in these instances the younger version simply forgets the events and only gains the memories when they experience it again as their older self. You know, it doesn't damage time. However, the issues arise when it comes to intentionally meddling with your own timeline. It's the reason a Doctor can't simply go back in time to save people or fix plans that have gone wrong, since he'd be changing the established sequence of events that caused him to travel back to begin with. Before the Flood has a great example of this, chaos, with the Doctor accidentally crossing his own timeline and having to stop Bennett warning O'Donnell of her death, because that, yes, would cause the Reapers to appear, since O'Donnell's death is part of the events that sent them back to begin with. Indeed, Father's Day is an example of what would happen if the Doctor or Bennett interfered in their own timeline. Rose crosses her own timeline to save her dad, breaking that exact sequence of events that put her to begin with. Think of it as like a double stabbing. The first wound is Rose being seen by her past self, and the second is her actively saving her dad. Pete still being alive means Rose would never go back to see him, and therefore never go back a second time to save him. It's hard to explain because it's all timey-wimey, but it's the exact kind of paradox the Reapers prey on, because they exist to take advantage of these wounds in time. It's the same reason they're able to appear in the church after Rose accidentally holds her younger self, because you know the Blinovitch limitation effect creates another wound in time, like being stabbed again in your original wound as it's being stitched back up. Pete's death restores the timeline and stitches everything back up, ironically making the Reapers themselves a paradox and erasing them, which is why they're defeated at the end of the episode, restoring all of their victims because they couldn't have died in the first place. But what does this mean for episodes like The Waters of Mars and The Wedding of River Song, where fixed points are changed and the Reapers don't appear? Well, fixed points in general are really complicated and confusing, but in a general sense they're moments in time that have to happen, because they're important or relevant events in the structure of history and time itself. They're moments that fundamentally cannot be changed because it would unravel time itself. As we see in episodes like the fires of Pompeii, the Doctor cannot prevent the volcano from erupting because it is a fixed point. He can save a few people like he does with Caecilius and his family, but he can't significantly affect the events because they're set in stone. Pete Tyler's death is implied to be a fixed point in time, which makes sense considering how Rose's life turned out. So how are The Waters of Mars and Wedding of River Song different, considering fixed points in time are also messed with there, but don't attract the Reapers? Well, in the case of Waters of Mars, the timeline only slightly changes. In the original events, the whole crew dies on Bowie Base 1, inspiring Adelaide Brooke's descendants to lead humanity into the stars. However, when the Doctor saves her, this future remains intact because Adelaide maintains her fixed death, and it simply bends the fixed point rather than outright breaking it. It's Adelaide who prevents the Reapers manifesting in that episode because, the fabric of time doesn't outright break. The Wedding of River Song is slightly different because River Song does break time by refusing to kill the Doctor at Lake Silencio, causing all of reality to start collapsing. I think the main reason the Reapers don't appear here is simply by chance. Meddling with history creates a wound, but not every wound becomes infected. The events of Father's Day were incredibly rare and specific. It was such an unlikely scenario that messed with time so fundamentally, and the Reapers happened to appear. Wedding of River Song doesn't involve River crossing her own timeline, and the fixed point isn't the Doctor being dead, it's that the universe thinks he's dead. So the chances of the Reapers appearing become a lot lower. The Reapers aren't incredibly smart, they don't actively know about paradoxes or wounds to infect. They're opportunistic and instinctual, only hopping in when they happen to find a paradox. There's no specific lore reason that they don't appear in Wedding of River Song or other episodes, it's all just headcanon from fans and speculation. But it does make sense that they simply don't appear for every paradox, because that's not how they work. They're not all-knowing, they're just like vultures. Hell, you could probably even argue that the events of Wedding of River Song are too disruptive for even the Reapers. They might not even want to, touch an event so chaotic and sensitive because it might be too much for them. The Reapers are endlessly fascinating with such an interesting setup as we see in Father's Day. Their design is terrifying and instantly memorable, and they served as a good way to show the effects of change in time itself. However, they're not a sustainable villain, because by most logic, they should be appearing in basically every episode ever, due to how much time is being changed and manipulated throughout the show. Rose saving her dad was a huge breach in the fabric of time, because there were so many paradoxes all at once, a very specific sequence of events with far-reaching consequences. The Reapers happen to be in the right place at the right time to take advantage, so there's nothing saying that they should appear more than they have. Most of the native species in the time vortex are opportunistic creatures, and the Reapers are no different. They're a monster that's really hard to properly flesh out even in expanded media, which is probably the main reason they haven't been explored more thoroughly. Despite first appearing 18 years ago. Yeah, I know, feel old now? They kind of break the show itself and all of its rules, so I personally like that they're a unique monster to the episode. But anyway, I've probably talked in circles and confused you all by this point, so I'll end it here. I've been going through every episode of the modern show and picking out one or two things from each episode to really dive into and explore. This time I'm taking a look at the Time Agency, as referenced by Captain Jack Harkness in the Empty Child two-parter. The Time Agency isn't the only kind of time and space law enforcement in Doctor Who, but it's probably the one I find the most interesting. Kind of like Doctor Who's version of Power Rangers Time Force, albeit with a bit less spandex. It's always been a fascinating part of the show's world building, especially with Captain Jack losing 2 years of his memory at the hands of the Time Agency. So why did this happen, and what actually is the Time Agency? Well, all that and more on today's Doctor Who lore video. Beware spoilers for the following pieces of media, and without further ado, this is everything you need to know about the Time Agency.
Woke up one morning when I was still working for them. Found they'd stolen 2 years of my memories.
The Time Agency itself was an organisation mainly operating from the 49th to the 52nd centuries, although obviously they were sending their time agents all throughout history using their time capsules and vortex manipulators, so it's a bit hard to track. According to the audio The Time Machine, the agency had used their powers to set up time treaties with eras before its existence as far back as the 42nd century. However that works. As usual, Doctor Who, the exact origins of the agency are a bit ambiguous. Trading Futures claims that it was created as part of the natural emergence of time travel after the War in Heaven, but most media related to the modern show explains its origins as filling the vacuum left by the apparent destruction of Gallifrey and the Time Lords in the Time War. Since, you know, they were the ones in charge of supervising the laws and web of time by using their own methods and time agents to keep time itself intact. Weapons of Past Destruction reveals that the Time Agency asserted itself as the protector of the web of time after fighting Centaurans and Cybermen for control. One account, Emotional Chemistry, claims that the Magellan Razum Kinzol started the Time Agency after attempting to capture Magnus Gril and appropriating his time travel technology with the goal of developing temporal paratroopers to police the past and future, protecting timelines and tracking down Gril himself, who became terrified of the mere mention of time agents. However, this stuff with Kinzol was in the year 5000, which conflicts with other media, but you know, I guess that's time travel for you. The Time Agency became incredibly powerful, developing its own war fleet and employing a number of highly qualified time agents to enforce its protection of time. The book Sometime Never explains that the purpose of these agents was to change without interfering, to leave an effect with no evidence of cause, to be untraceable, undetectable, invisible. To all intents and purposes, the agents do not exist. Indeed, the Time Agents were expressly forbidden from giving anyone any form of technology on missions because of the risks it posed if their advanced tech got into the hands of people who hadn't developed it yet. The Time Agency wielded a lot of power and influence, able to deal with time loops by containing them in bubble universes, but the organisation was far from perfect, such as their involvement in accidentally sinking Atlantis. The agency was also manipulated by the villainous Council of Eight, who were an organisation created to fill the gap when the Time Lords were wiped out. These 8 crystalline entities influenced the Time Agency to manipulate history and remove so-called rogue elements for them. The Council would ultimately be destroyed by the 8th Doctor, although one of the members would become the first Doctor or something. I don't know, it's all faction paradox gibberish to me. 90s Doctor Who was kind of weird.
Time agent would not ask questions. A time agent would know.
Like I mentioned earlier, a big part of the agency's early purpose was finding and arresting the criminal Magnus Gril, who fled to China and Earth's past and eventually ended up in 1890s London, where he died after trying to restore his broken body using the time cabinet. The Stuff of Nightmares shows that Gril's fear of the Time Agency was very rational, as the time agent Kara soon appeared in London, tasked with capturing Gril for his many crimes. Kara was an unorthodox and brutal operative who would kill anyone she deemed obtrusive, even if they had absolutely no idea what she was looking for. She even tortured George Lightfoot during her search, along with killing innocents along the way. However, when Kara discovered that Gril was already dead, she was distraught at not being able to kill the villain herself, although she died when her vortex manipulator exploded. Kara was far from the only brutal and villainous time agent though. We actually meet quite a few of these in Doctor Who media, especially because it's natural that the Time Agency would encounter other time travellers, particularly the Doctor themselves. The 11th Doctor comic Time Fraud features the rogue time agent Scott Thrower, who posed as a Time Lord and sought to harness the power of an alien solstice to rejuvenate himself and become young again. Whilst he did succeed, the Doctor had tampered with the energy so that Thrower became a child instead. The young boy tried to escape using his damaged vortex manipulator, although he was left unable to speak when he accidentally arrived at Holly Tree Lodge in 1965, leading to him becoming one of the victims of the 456. Yeah, just a little bit dark. The Puffin E-short time-lapse introduces the villainous Richard Somerset, a former time agent who accidentally erased the year 2004 because he got rejected by a girl. Somerset is described as being a tall, well-built man with dark hair and a tan, with a kind and friendly demeanour. Somerset owned a time adjuster, which is a gadget capable of slowing down and freezing time in a localised area, allowing the controller to achieve their mission without anyone knowing. He claimed that any time someone loses track of time, it's because a time agent has done their job properly. Somerset's job had been to deal with all the alien and trans-dimensional species who were attracted to the Iraq War. sending things like the Vulture-like corpse Skypes back into the void. However, Somerset fell for Maria Hackett, the US Air Force archivist he was working for as part of his cover story. He attempted to enter a relationship with her and show her all of time and space, but Maria turned him down, mainly because he was kind of disrespectful and insulting to her. Like, this man went to the pickup artist school of negging. Later on in 2009, Somerset trapped the Doctor and her companions and tried to use the TARDIS to fix his broken time adjuster, only to wipe out entire years of Earth's history. The Doctor talked him out of his actions and put things right, promising to not report him to the Time Agency as long as he gave her his time adjuster, because he had proven himself incapable of using it properly. Another corrupted time agent was Jaxa, who appears in the book Trading Futures. Jaxa's job was to go back in time to recover material lost during archival clearouts. You know, like old episodes of a certain British science fiction TV show. She was hired to work for Sabbath Day, a time-travelling rogue agent of a secretive secret service in the British Empire. And yes, like, they were the very secret service. Sabbath had saved Jaxa's life after a teleportation accident on the moon and hired her for his mercenary crew, although she was later killed by Jonah Cosgrove, the deputy head of the Eurozone Secret Service, at some point in the early 21st century. And whilst we're on the topic of 8th Doctor books, Eater of Wasps features the antagonistic trio of Carla, Jode and Fatboy, time agents sent on a mission to 1933 to recover an alien device capable of destroying worlds. Carla and Jode were both humans from the 49th century, whilst Fatboy was an android concealing a nuclear weapon inside him. I hope it was like inside a hatch or something, unless the future has nuclear weapon suppositories. In typical time agent fashion, Jode wanted to nuke the area to sterilize it because of the alien device, only for the 8th Doctor to convince Carla to destroy the device, and then he disarmed Fatboy before he could detonate his, nuclear butt plug. But that being said, not every time agent was bad. Most of them just seemed pretty easily manipulated. Like, if you need a vortex manipulator in the Doctor universe, it's pretty simple. The family of Blood procured one, along with Dorian Maldovar, who got his from the literal wrist of a so-called handsome time agent. Most people assume this is Captain Jack, but since the Time Agency was a huge organisation, it could really be anyone. I mean, unless they're all ugly. Neil Shaw also lost his vortex manipulator to an evil Adam Mitchell, and the villainous Harrison Crane overpowered an agent on the way to the lunar penal colony, using the damaged vortex manipulator to travel to 1894 and attempting to destroy London, although he was stopped by the Paternoster gang. So yeah, a lot of time agents were pretty dumb. One of the most egregious schemes by the Time Agency itself came in the audio The Shattered Hourglass, where Time Marshal Helen Barnes attempts to build the Hourglass, a weapon based on the moment from the Time War. The Hourglass was capable of predicting the certainty of events and removing individuals and entire locations from time by placing them in a time lock. After it led Barnes to place the entirety of Galaxy L10 in a time lock, the 10th Doctor confronted her and stopped her by giving the Hourglass weapon more independence, reversing the erasure of the galaxy. The Doctor then left with Time Agent Allison to save the universe, leaving Barnes with a warning that the Time Agency may disappear one day, as time always wins.
So, how's the Time Agency?
You didn't hear. It's shut down.
The most notable member of the Time Agency we know of was one Javik Pyotr Thane, who was born on the Beauchene Peninsula in the 51st century. Javik seemingly had a normal and peaceful childhood, growing up with his brother Grey. But everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Actually no, it was just a bunch of brutal unseen creatures. These creatures wiped out a lot of the population, including Thane's father Franklin. During this attack, Grey also went missing, leaving Thane all alone with his newly widowed mother, and forever blaming himself for losing Grey. Despite being just a boy, Thane and his best friend joined the war against those unnamed creatures, believing it would be an adventure. However, they were caught crossing into enemy lines and the two boys were captured. Since Thane was deemed the stronger of the pair, the creatures forced him to watch his best friend being tortured and killed before they let Thane go. In the years that followed, Thane searched for Grey, but eventually buried the memories of losing his brother. Thane would go on to become the first Beauchene resident to join the Time Agency, making him a poster boy of sorts, referred to as the Face of Beau. Thane's time in the agency remains a little bit murky, although we know he went on missions against the Weeping Angels and the Navigators, along with trying to secure a Monstrom Time Destroyer on Florin's world, and yeah, he also lived as a 17th century priest for a while, going by the name of Father Julian Horst. However, at some point, Javik Thane lost 2 years of his memory, and his fellow time agents refused to talk to him about it. Because of this, he fled the agency with a Chula warship and became the con man we meet in The Empty Child, adopting the name Captain Jack Harkness. Harkness was originally an American volunteer RAF group captain that died in 1941 after a surprise attack on the 133rd Squadron he served in. Despite only initially using the alias for the scheme in London, Javik would keep the Captain Jack name for the rest of his life, his eventual travels with the Doctor, and as part of Torchwood 3.
They saw your memories.
2 years of my life. No idea what I did.
For a long time, we didn't know what exactly happened during Captain Jack's lost years, although during his travels with the Ninth Doctor in the comic Secret Agent Man, Jack searched for answers. This led him to assume it may have been related to him questioning orders after being tasked with assassinating Zaloy Volk, a man who had actually been developing free time travel for all. According to Jack, the first rule of the Time Agent Academy was never questioning anything, which led him to believe the memory erasure was a punishment for searching for Volk, who appeared to still be alive, although this was like a con or something, I don't know. Anyway, the true circumstances of Jack's memory loss are revealed in the audio month 25, where it's revealed that the Time Agency was being secretly led by the Council, who lived in a bubble universe and controlled the agency using Magdalene Shank, the puppet leader of the Time Agency. The Council wanted to control the universe using the agency's access to history, and they used Captain Jack as an assassin to further their means, before wiping those 2 years of his memory. However, the future Jack teamed up with his past self to lure the scavenger race, the Harvesters, to destroy Magdalene and the Council within the bubble universe. Oh, and the two Jacks are also implied to have sex. No, this wasn't written by Stephen Moffat. During Captain Jack's time in Torchwood, he was reunited with Captain John Hart, one of his closest friends from the Time Agency, who was both his professional and sexual partner. They worked together a lot, with their missions seeing them face off against Vervoids and Weeping Angels, although the higher-ups weren't fond of their rebellious and maverick nature, especially since the audio The Death of Captain Jack claims both Time Agents made a habit to have sex with famous figures like Alexandra the Great, Christopher Marlowe and Catherine the Great. You know, they did a little bit of time meddling. Both agents were morally questionable, and John in particular was very violent and psychotic, having little regard for the well-being of others and adopting brutal means to achieve his goals. After Jack had his memories erased and fled, John also left the Time Agency, which had since dwindled to just 7 members and closed down, with Station Zero revealing that the agency became the Intergalactic Defence League. Captain John travelled to Cardiff and tricked the Torchwood 3 team into helping him recover an Arcadian diamond. However, this was actually a bomb, and the Torchwood team was forced to save John's life, sending him back to the rift where it had come from. But it turned out that John had managed to track down Grey, who had turned evil in the years of torment away from his older brother. Grey forced John to attack Torchwood and Cardiff once more for revenge, although once he was freed, John chose to help Torchwood defeat the villain, and Jack even offered John a chance to join the team. However, the latter refused, instead choosing to explore the world to understand Jack's love for the planet and its people. Oh yeah, and there was also an alternate universe timeline where John married Queen Victoria, sidelined Jack, and took over Torchwood, sabotaging the organisation at every turn, and basically doing every bad thing possible, like killing Gwen and Tosh, along with giving the 456 the 10% of children they asked for. Oh yeah, and he forced Yanto to walk around the hub in kinky outfits, which is an HR nightmare. Captain John is a nasty man. I don't know why he works here.
You went to murder rehab? I know, ridiculous. The odd kill, who does it hurt?
John would return to the UK to watch Yanto Jones's funeral in 2009 before travelling to Mexico and using a local rift to buy and sell alien artifacts. While there, John was seduced by the time traveller Merwin, who, you guessed it, stole an old vortex manipulator. Merwin tried to change the timeline by showing Yanto his future, although the Torchwood agent refused to comply with her demands and killed her before retconning himself. It wouldn't be until 2016 that Captain John would once again work with and against Torchwood during the Navigator's incident of the Titan Comics Torchwood miniseries. John was forced to work for fellow former Time Agent Karina Sterling from the Galedas Galaxy, who had been kicked out and imprisoned on the prison planet Contrelli for counterfeiting proton blasters. However, Karina escaped and married Sir James Sterling III, who owned Torchwood House in Scotland. This marriage was part of a wider scheme by Karina, who actually wanted to sell off the astrolabe to the Slitheen, although she was stopped by Torchwood, locked up, and just kind of forgotten about. The ultimate villain of the comic trilogy would also turn out to be a former Time Agent. Docilis was one of Jack's superiors during his time as a cadet, eventually becoming evil and creating the half-human, half-vervoid hybrid Sladen in an attempt to destroy the Earth. Oh, and Sladen was technically Captain Jack and Gwen's daughter, by the way. It's weird. Together, Jack and Sladen defeated Docilis, and Sladen joined the Torchwood team, with Captain John stealing Karina Sterling's makeshift TARDIS knockoff and disappearing off on his own travels once more. Some of the most recent friendly Time Agents we've met in Doctor Who media are Dr. Irene Schultz and Leon Perkins from A New Beginning, who were human scientists who created wearable time travel. However, they got captured during their first jump by the nameless alien the Hoarder, who forced them to steal paintings and other treasures from throughout time. Perkins was separated from Schultz and blackmailed into trying to steal the TARDIS itself. The 13th Doctor reunited the pair and helped them defeat the Hoarder by calling in the Time Agency. In the aftermath, the Doctor used their influence to get Schultz and Perkins jobs at the agency, which was still in its prime at this point. Irene and Leon were with the agency 10 years before they met the Doctor again in Hidden Human History, reuniting reuniting to help fight Stylian flesh eaters, although their relationship remained a bit rocky and slightly adversarial due to their difference in operation. However, they parted on good terms as the agents returned into the Vortex. Lastly, when the Doctor was working with the Corsair in the comic Old Friends, it turned out that the Corsair had been employed by the Hoarder earlier in his timeline, only for her to defy him and help the Doctor fight back against the Hoarder. This comic also sees the return of a much older Schultz and Perkins, who arrest the Hoarder and bid farewell to the Doctor, leaving on much friendlier terms than any time before. The audio treason plot introduces Rita Cooper, a probationary time agent tasked with protecting the gunpowder plot due to its importance to time. She had a reversal gun thing which allowed her to send time travelers back to where they came from, but it didn't work on Missy, who was interfering. After the monk stopped Missy's meddling, Rita found herself sent to the Titanic, so not exactly the best place to end up. Lastly, for the time agents I was able to track down in Doctor Who media is Kira Sandstrom, who actually ended up becoming a companion of the 12th Doctor in the audio series Time Jacked. Kira Sandstrom was sent to the planet Kalandra as part of her training. However, she tried to jailbreak her vortex manipulator without actually knowing how to reassemble it, so she tracked down the Doctor at St. Luke's and tried to force him to help her. The pair then had a few different adventures through time and space as time got all wobbly, before they faced off against the most wanted rogue time agent Haviland, sending him to 1813 where he swore revenge. At the end of the adventure, the Doctor took Kira back to the time agency in the TARDIS, the young time agent having redeemed herself for her meddling in time and kidnapping of the Doctor, with an implication that the Doctor will eventually check back in on her down the line. And that's it for the time agency and its many members we know about. Like I said at the beginning, this is an absolutely fascinating part of Doctor Who lore, and I really like how expanded media has started to use them more often, having them show up to deal with all these time-based crimes and emergencies. I also love how the time agency is one of those things that was kind of introduced and hinted at in Classic Who before becoming a much bigger deal in expanded media and having characters like Captain Jack and Captain John introduced in the modern era. It's a brilliant example of Doctor Who's deep world building throughout its many years. I feel like the Time Agency could be ripe for its own spin-off show, something like Legends of Tomorrow, where we follow time agents travelling throughout history and dealing with problems. There genuinely is potential there. Or, just make a Big Finish series out of it, they'll do it for anyone. Anyway, that's everything we currently know about the Time Agency and Jack Harkness's mysterious memory loss. I'm sure I probably missed something out, but that's all I have for you for now. I already spoke about the Slitheen and other Raxacoricothalapatorians before, but I didn't really go into depth about one of the most important members of the species, Blon Fel Fotch, the villainous Slitheen introduced in Aliens of London and returning later on in Boomtown. Blon was a fun villain, able to perfectly balance comedy and threat, but her story is actually deeper than her TV appearances make it seem. Expanded media has given us a glimpse into Blon's past, her time as Cardiff Mayor, and her ultimate fate after the events of Boomtown, so I thought I'd explore the rise, fall, and rise again of Blon Fel Fotch Pasamir de Slitheen, and as always, beware spoilers for these stories.
Dinner in bondage. Works for me.
Like all Slitheen, Blon Fel Fotch was hatched deep underground in a cave on Raxacoricothalapatorius. This was a family tradition of sorts, with the newborns having to burrow their way out to survive against all the odds. She succeeded and then eventually took part in her first hunt at the age of 13, winning in the darkness. Whilst not all Raxacoricothalapatorians were evil, the Slitheen were one of the most infamous clans thanks to their criminal practices and black market dealings. Blon Fel Fotch knew any refusal to take part in the family business would lead to her father feeding her to venom grubs, so she joined the Slitheen even if her mother tried to kill her multiple times, if the tortured audio sync is to be believed. Boomtown seems to imply that Blon may have been married at some point, although she might just have been referring to Margaret Blaine's husband if she had one. Married or not, Blon never had any children, but she did have at least 2 brothers, one of whom was Jakrasa Fel Fotch, the ringleader of the Slitheen invasion of Earth in 2006. Jakrasa became the Prime Minister under the disguise of Joseph Green, until he died. As part of this scheme, Blon Fel Fotch killed Margaret Blaine, a senior member of MI5, the UK's counterintelligence and security agency. We don't know much about the original Margaret Blaine, but Boomtown implies Blon killed her personally, and Sync elaborates that Blaine died screaming, with the Slitheen then using Blaine's skin to infiltrate MI5 and the UK government as part of her family's plan to destroy the Earth and sell its remains as fuel for starships. Blon was one of the most hands-on Slitheen during the crisis, hunting down Rose Tyler and Harriet Jones before taunting the Doctor himself because she enjoyed the hunt that much, gleeful at the smell of fear. However, when the Doctor and Mickey Smith blew up Downing Street, all the Slitheens seemed to be dead, including Blon Fel Fotch herself. However, despite her fellow Slitheen conspirators dying, Blon was actually able to escape by using an emergency teleport, and found herself in a skip on the Isle of Dogs in East London. Still using Margaret's skin suit, Blon fled to Cardiff, where she was able to get herself elected as Lord Mayor. The Audio 1 rule sheds a bit of light on the leadership struggles just before Blon became Lord Mayor. In early 2005, the mayor was a man named Roy Llewellyn, who died during the events of the Autumn invasion that year, supposedly. Despite the official story being that Llewellyn died during that supposed terrorist attack, he had actually been murdered by the ambitious councillor Barry Jackson, who was acting on the orders of the Mysterious Committee, a group of powerful aliens who invaded planets for profit. The committee gave Jackson an alien to kill his competition and guarantee his ascension to mayor. However, during this killing spree, Jackson was stopped by Tortured One leader Yvonne Hartman, who forced the mayor to confess to his involvement with the committee, and Yvonne allowed him to live as long as he kept an eye on Captain Jack Harkness and kept a lookout for the potential arrival of the Doctor. However, despite being puppeted by both the committee and Tortured One, Barry Jackson didn't seem to last very long, as Blon Fel Fotch easily swept a mayoral election later that year thanks to low voter turnout, believing herself to be the perfect example of the consequences of the people of Cardiff not using their right to vote. The so-called Margaret Blaine became Lord Mayor of Cardiff in 2006, and early on she had an encounter with Torture 3, specifically Susie Costello. The audio sync sees Blon investigating a crashed Illyrian spaceship with the aim of using it to escape Earth. However, Susie was also investigating the spaceship, and the two became bound by control circuit bracelets, similar to the 9th Doctor and Blon later on in Boomtown. They both try to kill one another in different ways, but their bracelets can only be disconnected when a rescue pod arrives, forcing them to work together to free themselves and survive war missiles capable of destroying the entire city of Cardiff. After navigating the crisis in their own less than heroic ways, Blon and Susie agreed to a secrecy pact, Susie protecting Blon from Torchwood, and Blon keeping Susie's betrayal of the Illyrians a secret because, you know, Susie sold them out. As they parted, Susie even called Blon her friend, although it's unknown whether the two had any further contact before Blon's demise later that year. This event no doubt played a big role in the downfall of Susie Costello, as she became more and more disenfranchised with her job, and her experiences with aliens corrupted her even further. One of Margaret Blaine's main projects as the Lord Mayor of Cardiff was the Blade Drúg project, a proposed nuclear power plant in the heart of the Welsh capital city. As we see in Boomtown, Blon killed anyone who looked too much into the project or threatened to expose the danger it posed, because she actively wanted an accident at the power plant to combine with the Cardiff Rift and destroy Earth to allow her to escape back into space. This sinister plan highlights the intelligence and cunning of Blon Fel Fotch, willing to do whatever it takes to achieve her goals, along with her lust for revenge on Earth, a planet she seemed to particularly hate even before the loss of her people. This patient and brutal plan to blow up Cardiff and Earth as a whole almost succeeded when the Doctor attempted to arrest her, with her extrapolator opening the rift through the TARDIS and causing a big earthquake in Cardiff Bay. The episode sees the Doctor take Blon to dinner to pass the time as he tries to decide what to do with her. Of course, punishments on Raxacoricofallapatorius were brutal, criminals being lowered into a vat of acetic acid and boiled alive. Whether it was a fear of this fate or genuine remorse, Blon seemed to be terrified of returning to her native planet, trying to convince the Doctor to spare her by pointing out his own flaws and nature as a killer. However, despite all those claims of innocence and requests for mercy, the repentance was all just an act to get the Doctor to drop his guard, with Captain Jack accidentally activating the extrapolator and causing a big earthquake in Cardiff, only for Blon's plan to backfire as the device opened the heart of the TARDIS itself, regressing the villain back into the form of an egg. This essentially killed her and reset Blon, the Doctor taking her back to her home planet to be reborn to a different Raxacoricofallapatorian family. Due to her nature as a high-ranking elected official, Margaret Blaine's disappearance after the Cardiff earthquake was reported by UNIT on the 8th of October. However, in the Twilight Streets, Blaine's secretary Idris Hopper claimed that the so-called official answer was that the mayor was among the casualties of the earthquake, rather than, having been regressed to an alien egg. Just a side note, Captain Jack Harkness tried to retcon Idris over dinner, hoping to wipe his memory of Jack and the Doctor, but the pill actually failed, which is apparently something that could only happen to 1 in 80,000 people. The book also mentions that Captain Jack tried to sleep with Idris knowing the secretary wouldn't remember it in the morning, which is a bit, not sure about the consent boundaries there. Idris ended up helping to decode Billis Manger's diary and successfully retconned himself with a double dose before taking a job in Berlin, where he hopefully didn't work for a giant killer alien wearing a human skin suit. But what happened to Blon Fel Fotch herself after the Doctor returned her home to live a new life? Well, according to Russell T Davies's The Writer's Tale, the Doctor and Donna would have encountered a young Blon Fel Fotch in the Shadow Proclamation during the events of the Stolen Earth. It would have been revealed that she was adopted by the much nicer and less criminal Jingathene family, taking on the name of Margaret. This scrapped plot thread was actually picked up in the comic A Confusion of Angels, where we find out that Margaret has somehow kept her skin suit and joined the Shadow Proclamation as a detective inspector, since the Shadow Proclamation is basically the outer space police. When we meet Margaret in A Confusion of Angels, she's working with the Jadoon, who are led by Captain Nibri, boarding the container ship Jaden, where the 12th Doctor, Bill and Nardole are facing off against Weeping Angels. It's here that we can see just how much Blon Fel Fotch has changed now that she has been reborn as Margaret Ag Chris Thera Ford Jingathene. She's a lot more courageous and brave, standing up to the Weeping Angels and even decapitating one with her Raxacoricophalapatorian arm. It's a great story to show how her cunning and leadership abilities can be a powerful force for good now that she's working for the Shadow Proclamation. And she even defends the Doctor from a death sentence. So it's proof that the 9th Doctor was right to give Blon Fel Fotch a literal second chance at life. And that's the story of Blon Fel Fotch, a really interesting villain who was originally only meant to exist in Aliens of London and World War III, but actor Annette Badland impressed Russell T Davies so much he wrote Boomtown to include Blon Fel Fotch again. This gave her a lot more to do, and it's interesting how expanded media has continued to build upon the story of Blon before and after her time on the show. She went from being a merciless, scheming monster to a determined and heroic champion of justice, which is just a brilliant story of redemption. She may not have the deep backstory of other Series 1 characters like Clive Finch or Henry Van Statten, but Blon Fel Fotch is still a really fascinating and multi-layered character who shows that the Slitheen are more than just farting aliens in skin suits, and it's nice that expanded media was able to show us that happy ending for the character after her fate was left somewhat unknown at the end of Boomtown. But yeah, that's the story of Blon Fel Fotch. Series 1 is notable for how Earth-centric it was. It's the only series of the modern show to be entirely set on or around Earth, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have some brilliant settings for its episodes. Probably my favourite of these is Satellite 5, or as it's also known, the Game Station. Satellite 5 first appeared in The Long Game, before making its surprising reappearance in Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways. This space station not only has a really cool and striking design in my opinion, it also has a lot of interesting details and lore elaborated upon in later media. From a Cyberman incursion in the station's early days to its ultimate demise, this is the full story of Satellite 5, and of course beware spoilers for the following stories. Before we talk about Satellite 5 itself, I think it's important to touch upon the planet it orbited and the wider empire it served as a symbol for. In The Long Game, we're introduced to the fourth great and bountiful human empire. This was a period where Earth was supposedly at its height, with its influence spread across 1 million planets and 1 million species. Earth itself was covered in endless megacities and had a population of roughly 96 billion, along with 5 artificial moons alongside the natural one we all know and love. Now, a megacity is rather obviously a massive city. Think of something like Coruscant or Night City. Sprawling cities filled with a much bigger population than they can realistically handle. According to the 9th Doctor, the fourth great and bountiful human empire was meant to be a flourishing society with millions of species, good manners, fine food, cutting edge technology and mankind in the middle. Although, as we all know, the reality was pretty much the opposite because of the Daleks and the Jagrafest messing with the timeline and the development of humanity. Satellite 5 was one of the iconic features of the fourth great and bountiful human empire, serving as a hallmark symbol as it orbited Earth. It's never been revealed when the satellite was actually built or launched, but we know it went live in the year 199,909. Satellite 5 was made to seem like a technological marvel for humanity, innocently controlling all of the media output from one single location. Of course, this shining reputation was always a farce, designed to distract humanity from the corruption and dark secrets it was hiding from the planet below, allowing the controllers to manipulate the whole of Earth into gleeful ignorance and blind subservience. In terms of the physical structure of Satellite 5, it was a huge station capable of accommodating millions of people, and it was reinforced against meteors, with the powerful material known as hydrocombination used in its construction. Just don't expect it to be able to survive any Dalek attacks. More impressive, however, were the asbantium-lined lift shafts described in the novel Extraction Point. These panels weren't as thick as the wall in Heaven Sent, but they were still sturdy and dense enough to do their job. There were 500 floors on Satellite 5, with floor 0 serving as arrivals and departures, and floor 500 the management floor run by controllers. However, we do know about a few of the other floors in the middle thanks to the main episodes and also expanded media. Of course, these floors are mentioned across different eras of the station, so their purposes most likely changed throughout that time. Floor 16 was the surgical level where Adam Mitchell got his implant. Big Brother was broadcast from 10 floors including floor 56. Floor 407 saw the broadcasting of The Weakest Link, and What Not to Wear was broadcast from floor 56. The Visual Dictionary claims that Floor 247 specialised in lifestyle programming and that there were several main residential floors too. Oh, and Extraction Point reveals that Floor 333 is a karaoke bar, so that's pretty fun. Floor 139 had a food court as we see in the beginning of the long game. At that point in the Empire's history, the food court served junk food like Zaffic drinks and Kronk burgers. Although the game Hidden Mystery suggests that the food court also served Venusian seafood and moonweed tacos, along with there being a robo food bistro stall. The game also shows the station to have a repair bay, medical bay and security rooms, along with the food court having a fully fledged drinks bar. But of course, the most important floor on the entire station was Floor 500, where everyone wanted to be promoted to, even though those who were conveniently disappeared immediately after. You know, I'm sure that's just a coincidence, nothing to worry about there. Floor 500 in the long game era is a prime example of propaganda. Rumours of gold floors making it seem like this incredibly desirable and perfect place to work in. According to the Time Traveller's Almanac, it was also rumoured to contain marble toilets, double beds, and 15 different food menus, along with the staff supposedly having lead positions on the satellite. However, as we see in the long game, the truth is much darker, with the floor actually being cold and abandoned aside from its enslaved zombie-like workers. Makes you wonder if The Walls Are Made of Gold was actually just a game of telephone stemming from Bloody Hell It's Cold. The Doctor's first encounter with Satellite 5 took place in the long game, but the earliest the Doctor visited the station was actually within the year it supposedly began operation. The game Hidden Mystery sees the 13th Doctor and Yaz arrive on Satellite 5 when they're chasing the Paradox Cloud. They meet a repair shop worker called Mia and help her to restore the controls of the station in time to protect it from a meteor crisis. However, it then turns out that the Paradox Cloud was converting people into Cybermen, with everyone on the station forcefully converted or deleted. The Doctor and Yaz work out that the Paradox Cloud was being transmitted from the station, and a Cyber Telosian had been hooked up to cores on Floor 500, causing all those station-wide conversions. This Cyberman was the subject of an experiment, and he forces the Doctor to disable him, reverting everyone on the station back into people and freeing Satellite 5 of the Paradox Cloud for good. Weirdly enough, despite the game placing these events at the year 199,909, there are implications of it being during or after the Game Station era, which is a bit confusing and contradictory. But since the game explicitly labels it as 199,909, we'll stick with that. Around the year 199,909, after the Paradox Cloud incident, the mighty Jagrafest of the Holy Hadrojasic Maxorodenfo was installed into the ceiling of Floor 500 as part of the Dalek Emperor's scheme to keep the human race ignorant and passive. The station contained every piece of information within the Empire, even sensitive details like birth certificates, shopping habits, and bank statements. Man, you know, if only I still had that Nord sponsorship, it would be perfect time for an ad. Satellite 5 was responsible for broadcasting 600 channels of constant news reports, with personnel gathering, writing and selling the news using their horrifying brain chip technology. Seriously, who would actually want this? This level of control manipulated the Empire in subtle ways, shifting the social, economic and technological growth to make the entire human race more xenophobic and isolationist. The puppet leader of this operation was the editor, who just seemed to be a guy. Yeah, there's no deeper lore or secrets, he's just kinda there. His boss, the Jagrafest, was a huge gelatinous slug blob thing with a very eloquent way of speaking. Couldn't have put it better myself. The Jagrafest apparently had a lifespan of 3,000 years, and his metabolic rate was the reason the whole of Floor 500 was kept so cold. Around 91 years after the Jagrafest was, glued to the ceiling, the 9th Doctor, Rose and Adam Mitchell rocked up to soak in the sights as we see in the long game. One of the first people the Doctor and his companions encountered on Satellite 5 was Suki McRae Cantrell, who was actually Ava St. Julien, the last known operative of the Freedom Foundation. This was a group of militant anarchists who knew something wasn't right with Satellite 5, and Ava infiltrated the station to prove that it was being manipulated by outside sources. She adopted the name Suki and crafted a clever backstory claiming she was from the Independent Republic of Morocco and that she was taking the journalist job to cover her sister's university fees. Suki seemed to be friends with colleague Kathika Santini Kadini, who was also a journalist working on the station. When Suki was promoted to Floor 500 and killed by the editor, Kathika decided to help the Doctor investigate the truth behind the station, making her own way to the top floor. With the Doctor and Rose held captive, it was actually Kathika who saved the day and destroyed the Jagrafest by raising the temperature. Despite Suki being dead and puppeted by a chip implant, enough of the freedom fighter remained and she was able to stop the editor from escaping, leading to his death. After the liberation of Satellite 5, Kathika remained on the station, hoping to return a sense of journalistic integrity to the Empire and its news gathering. Almost instantly after the death of the Jagrafest, all the news channels closed down and plunged Earth into anarchy due to a loss of communications, collapsing governments and the wider economy as a whole. However, despite this, Satellite 5 seemed to thrive under the leadership of Kathika, who became director in the year 200,003. The novel Extraction Point reveals that Kathika's influence led to the Empress of Earth decreeing to improve the quality of entertainment throughout the Empire, with dedicated entertainment staffers wearing the colour turquoise to denote their role. To quote the book, fine dining, karaoke and multiculturalism seemed to be thriving on Satellite 5. Even if Earth itself was suffering, Satellite 5 therefore seemed to be thriving at this point. Unlike the previous leadership, Kathika was willing to spend time with her people and even mingle with them for parties. At this point in the station's history, the assassin Doom arrived on floor 333, tasked with killing an ethereal being during her mission to find the Doctor. It was here that she met the middle-aged eccentric man Andrei Kolekvo, who was a television producer in charge of documentaries and the popular show Ghost v Whatever, which was produced by the Telluric TV company, which was located on floor 267, Office Suite 6. Ghost v Whatever was a program where volunteers are recruited to encounter ghosts, like former acquaintances or old lovers, with closure being the main goal. However, in typical Satellite 5 fashion, this closure is actually the killing of said ghost. Because of course it is, the game station had to start from somewhere after all. The studio set of Ghost v Whatever was on floor 500, which still maintained its chilly atmosphere for a sense of horror, along with the skeletal remains of the Jagrafest and the dead workers. Kolevko seemed to be familiar with the Lesser Order of Oberon, the group Doom worked for, and he offered to help Doom hunt the ethereal being, only to turn on her because of course he did. Kolekvo wanted to kill Doom for the spectacle of it, hoping for billions of viewers to tune into the deaths of Doom and the Ghost. However, Kolevko seemingly died during these events, so after escaping, Doom was wanted by both security forces and 3 major broadcasters, the latter of whom were offering a huge fee for an interview and the rights to her life story. To the public, Kolevko mysteriously died in a gruesome fashion, being skinned alive with only a single organ remaining and the rest mysteriously missing. However, the truth was that he was actually being used as a skin suit by the Slitheen and most likely died long before he even commissioned Ghost vs Whatever. It was all part of some planet cracking as Bantium mining scheme, but that's not relevant right now. Despite Satellite 5 seemingly thriving under the control of Kathika, things in the Empire only worsened as the economy continued to collapse. By the year 200,080, the government downfall had led to the Great Atlantic Smog Storm. According to the Time Traveller's Almanac, the specific cause of the smog storm was planet-wide pollution increasing to lethal levels, making it incredibly dangerous to go outside. In fact, it was so bad that everyone was confined to their homes, having to rely on news flashes to tell them when it was safe to leave. This confinement only worsened things, leading to Satellite 5 becoming the game station to provide easy and perverse entertainment to the masses down below. At some point before the year 200,100, the Bad Wolf Corporation took control of Satellite 5 and the Daleks installed the Controller, a blind 5-year-old human girl, into floor 500. The Controller was essentially enslaved and forced to monitor the transmissions of the stations, which were mainly game shows and reality TV. These shows were a very dark glimpse into the dystopian nature of the Earth Empire at this time. Contestants were chosen against their will and forcefully transmatted to the station to take part in these games, which were almost all based on 20th and 21st century Earth shows. The episode Bad Wolf names some of these shows as Big Brother, which had 10 houses on the station, one airing on channel 44,000, The Weakest Link, What Not to Wear, Call My Bluff, Countdown, Stars in Their Eyes, Ground Force, Bear With Me, and Wipeout. All of these shows had sinister twists, usually revolving around the seemingly gruesome deaths of those taking part. The joke book Knock Knock Who's There elaborates race on some more of these TV shows, such as My Hazmat Suit Has a Rip in It, Get Me Out of Here, The Great British Takeoff, Just a Minute, Holmes Under the Hammer, Through the Keyhole, Bargain Hunt, Strictly Comet Dancing, Only Connect, and Have I Got Killer Robots for You. And yet, despite all of this, Ant and Dec were probably still winning their yearly NTA award. Along with all the horrifying and deadly game shows, the Empire ruled with an iron fist. In a move that would make the current UK government blush with envy, TV licenses were now mandatory and evading payment was punishable by death, even though channels had adverts anyway. However, interestingly, the game station seemed to be covered by its own laws, with the ability to punish criminals by exiling them to the moon's lunar penal colony without trial. This was a prison colony that had existed as far back as the 26th century, although the Doctor managed to escape being sent there again when he was arrested on the game station. Indeed, after the 9th Doctor, Rose Tyler and Captain Jack Harkness were forcibly transmatted onto the game station to compete in the shows, they discovered the truth of the secret Dalek plan. Instead of contestants being disintegrated, they were actually being teleported to Dalek ships where they would be harvested for genetic material in order to rebuild the race after the Dalek Emperor escaped the Time War. The Emperor had been puppeting humanity for at least a century, hiding their transmissions within the signals of the space station and using the TV broadcasts to hide their fleet of 200 ships as they rebuilt in secret. Of course, what followed was the Battle of the Game Station, where the now exposed Dalek fleet attacked both the space station and the planet below. The Doctor had managed to ensure the evacuation of the majority of the people on the satellite, but 108 remained, with a fraction of that amount agreeing to defend the game station from the Dalek army, while the Doctor built a Delta Wave to destroy the fleet. However, everyone defending the station died, including Captain Jack Harkness, with the Daleks only being destroyed when Rose became the Bad Wolf entity and turned the entire invasion force into dust, including the Emperor himself. As we see in Parting of the Ways, the Doctor took the energy of the Time Vortex out of Rose's body to save her, but regenerated as a result, leaving the game station before the resurrected Captain Jack could reach the TARDIS. Indeed, as the Bad Wolf entity, Rose somehow managed to bring Captain Jack back to life and inadvertently made him immortal. Big Finish's story, The Year After I Died, shows us a glimpse of what happened to Jack after the massacre of the game station, the former companion the only survivor of the battle. He made his way to Earth, which had been ravaged by the Dalek assault, entire continents destroyed due to the bombings. Despite the Daleks being defeated and Earth being liberated, the planet was a wasteland with little hope of salvation. Traumatized after what happened, Jack would refuse the limelight as the hero of the game station, choosing to instead live a reclusive life in a small cabin near the ruins of the Black Country Dome for a whole year. However, in Earth's darkest hour, it would once again turn to its familiar symbol in the sky, Satellite 5, which was combined with starliners and freight ships to form the new structure, Trier Station. This was the base of the Hope Foundation, a charity founded by Vorticia Trier in the aftermath of the Dalek invasion of Earth in 200,100. The Hope Foundation claimed to help the remaining humans relocate off Earth and forge a new life, although much like Floor 500 all those years ago, nobody ever heard back from these resettled people again. Suspicious of the Hope Foundation, aspiring reporter Silo Crook sought out Jack Harkness, despite journalism not being a priority on the broken and devastated Earth. Despite his reluctance, Jack was also suspicious of the Foundation, and the pair teamed up to board Trier Station. Here they found out the truth that the Hope Foundation was a front for a rich elite of humans living in the space beyond, always looking out for themselves and exploiting the desperate Earth refugees however they saw fit. So basically, it was just a huge human trafficking ring. Doctor Who is fun! After Jack and Silo uncovered the truth of Trier Station, Vorticia was overthrown by her subjects and betrayed by her downtrodden personal assistant Gorky Sachs, whom she had constantly abused. Sachs used the uprising as an opportunity to remove his boss's eyes and access her great wealth, ensuring a better life for himself. However, despite Vorticia being stopped and her scheme foiled, the revolt caused Trier Station to lose orbit, Jack having to electrocute himself to land the station safely, therefore discovering his ability to revive after death. With Trier Station safely landed on Earth, Satellite 5 finally achieved its supposed goal of benefiting humanity, with the abundance of resources salvaged, allowing humanity to rebuild itself, instilling hope within Captain Jack, and with the dismantling of Trier Station, thus ends the tale of Satellite 5. The Long Game and Parting of the Ways couldn't be any further apart in fan reception. One is a heavily disliked episode seen as a weak link in the series, and the other is often heralded as one of the best stories in the entire modern Doctor Who era. However, I think people should give Satellite 5 a bit more credit as the setting of both of these stories. It's a fantastic location full of interesting lore and dynamics. I really love it. I think it's a brilliant example of how the Doctor can meddle with the timelines even inadvertently, since defeating the Jagrafess only made things worse for the fourth great and bountiful human empire. The Dalek Emperor was masterminding the whole operation, and it created some great, albeit surface level, socio-political commentary about propaganda, news manipulation, and the dangers of cheap reality show entertainment. Satellite 5 is a dark symbol of an all too likely future for humanity, and it's a setting ripe for more stories like the one we've seen in expanded media. From its beginning as Satellite 5 to its dismantlement as Trier Station, this simple yet incredible space station has proven to be a bit of a dark horse when it comes to recurring Doctor Who settings, and I think that should definitely be celebrated. It's a beautifully designed and realised set, and even though it was reused for purely budgetary reasons, the return in Bad Wolf absolutely made sense and provided the perfect backdrop for a series-long arc and a phenomenal finale. But yeah, that's everything you need to know about Satellite 5 and its timeline. I hope you liked this video, or at the very least, you learned something new. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to give a special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patron Matthew Burns, and my Gold level patrons Chris Douglas and Daniel Shillito. Thank you so much for your support.